He's killing people in the streets of New York City.
The Zodiac Killer terrified California in the 1960s and was never caught. Over 20 years later, the killing started again, but this time in New York City.
He said, I hope we don't have another Son of Sam on our hands.
But this wasn't the original Zodiac. It was a copycat. On the 31st of May 1990, NYPD responded to reports of a 78-year-old male who'd been shot.
Mr. Joseph Procci was out rummaging through the garbage pails, and he starts to walk home. And he gets into his front areaway of the home where he lived, and an individual approaches him from the rear, asking him if he can provide him a glass of water. Mr. Procci said, what are you talking about, a glass of water? You know, it's late at night, I'm going home. With this, the individual pulled out his gun and shot Mr. Procci. Mr. Joseph Procci was an elderly male who lived right around the corner from the subway station.
He was a World War II veteran. He had become a bit senile. We were told he had his days and nights mixed up, so he would go walking the streets late at night.
And he would talk to everybody on the street, and he would go garbage can to garbage can, looking to obtain cans and bottles to cash them in for the nickel deposit in New York City at the time. So on this particular evening, Mr. Procci suffered a very serious gunshot wound to his chest, and he immediately went down to the ground. When neighbors called police, they heard the gunfire, they heard Mr. Procci calling for help. When the detectives responded, while the uniformed officers were taking care of Mr. Procci and getting him into an ambulance to the hospital, the detectives were scouring the crime scene, and they observed a letter that was on Mr. Procci's front stoop, and it was being weighted down by 3 stones. They examined the letter, and the letter had like a pie circle.
He was claiming to be one Zodiac, one and the same, one Zodiac.
He articulates that he was going to kill one member of society for each astrological sign that there was, so that would be 12. So the detectives realized that, no, now we have a problem.
The next day, Michael visited the scene. Joseph Procci had survived the shooting, but was critically ill in hospital.
We arrived in front of Procci's house. There was debris left from the emergency medical technicians, you know, rubber gloves and gauze pads. Procci's clothes were cut off him at the scene so they could render aid. And Bill Clark was a very seasoned, experienced first-grade detective. I remember picked up an article of clothing, and he was looking to see if there was a bullet hole. And I remember we were all a bit surprised. A bullet had passed through Procci's body, was in the clothing, and had fallen out. And so we had our first piece of evidence at that point. I directed that we do a canvass, and there were only 4 of us, so I was knocking on doors along with the detectives, asking neighbors on the block if they had seen or heard anything. I called emergency service to conduct a sewer search. In other words, any sewers that a shooter might dispose a gun in. Also directed that a car canvass be conducted. If you recall, the Son of Sam in the 70s, he was caught by a traffic ticket, you know? So it kind of became standard operating procedure to record all the plates of the cars in the area. So we did that. For a few square blocks, we recorded every plate. Now you also have to recall this is the spring of 1990, so we don't have the technology that we have today. So you have the detectives walking around with a notepad and writing license plate after license plate in the pad with the make and description of the car. So we opened up our investigation, and We tried to interview Joseph Procci at the hospital. I had dispatched detectives to do that, and they came back and they said, he's had surgery, he's not conscious, he's in no shape to give an interview. When we ultimately spoke to Joe Procci, he really couldn't give a good physical description, so it didn't give us a whole lot to go on.
Detectives turned their attention to the note found at the crime scene, claiming to be from the Zodiac.
The original note went to the lab, but we had some copies. So when my boss came in, Chief John Mencken, when I got back from the scene, I went to his office and I showed him a copy of the note. And Chief Mencken was a very experienced 35-year veteran of the NYPD. And I said, Chief, I hope we don't have another Son of Sam on our hands. But we only have this one shooting, and we have this one creepy note, and he told me to keep him posted. And, we ran the plates and identified the owners of the plates and went out and looked for additional witnesses and typed up reports on the work we had been doing. Document examiners from the lab were examining to see if they could match it to any other writings that were on file at the lab. There were no discernible latent fingerprints on that note left at the scene of Joseph Procci's shooting. And we really weren't making much progress. We didn't identify a shooter with the little bit we had to go on. And a couple of weeks into the investigation, I got a call from Bill Clark. And Bill was working on another homicide case, and he was in the 109th Precinct in Flushing working on that case. And he got a call from a female reporter that was an acquaintance of his. Her name was Ann Murray, and she was a writer for the New York Post. And she had received a letter from someone claiming to be the Zodiac. And there was no press on this case at all when Joseph Procci got shot. We were playing it very close to the vest because you're always fearful of copycats coming out of the woodwork. And so I called Ann Murray and I asked her if she would share the note with us, and she faxed, don't forget we're in 1990, she faxed a copy of that note to Bill Clark. He sent it to me, and we were pretty certain that the person who left the note beside Joseph Procci was the same person who wrote this note. However, this note was claiming that he had committed 2 prior shootings. And it was some cryptic writing. This is the Zodiac, the 12 signs will die when the belts in the heavens are seen. It said, all shoot in Brooklyn, but my victim was shot in Queens. 380 or 9mm, 9mm, RNL, round-nosed lead bullets. Had some other cryptic writing on it.
He boasted that the bullets that he was using in his weapons had no lands or grooves. What lands and grooves are, when a firearm is manufactured in a factory, they drill out the core of the barrel for the purpose of making the bullet, as it flies through the barrel, spin. This way it's more accurate and it goes further. So he was bragging in his communications that there were no lands and no grooves in the bullet. And upon examination in the ballistics laboratory, he was accurate. There were no traditional lands and grooves on the bullets that were recovered from Mr. Procci.
And it had the pie slice, the round circle with 3 pie slices, and it had astrological signs in the 3 pie slices. And it said, all dead. Well, Joseph Procci was still alive. So we began to look through a hand search of records because we didn't have databases that we could just tap into like we have today. And there were no homicides that matched up. However, they did find 2 felonious assaults where victims had survived, and it matched those dates. And it said, man shot with a cane. And when we matched it up against that report, victim walked with a cane. The second victim that it matched was a guy who was drunk. It was all in the middle of the night, between 2, 3, 4 a.m. Prolifone was shot closer to 2:30. The other two that we matched up were, in fact, shot in Brooklyn, right a short distance from Joseph Prolifone's crime scene, and they survived as well.
The NYPD had to establish whether this really could be San Francisco's infamous 1960 Zodiac killer returned.
We had sent copies of the letters that we had received, the one by Prolifone, the one that was sent to Anne Murray. We sent those letters to the San Francisco Police Department, and their forensic document examiners went over them, and their lab went over our letters, and they were able to say with 100% degree of certainty that the guy who's writing our letters was not the guy they were dealing with in the late 60s and early 70s. So at least we were able to rule out, but he was claiming to be one Zodiac, one and the same, one Zodiac. So he wanted to make himself bigger than he really was.
Nearly 1 month after the shooting, Joseph Prolifone passed away. But detectives now knew the identities of the two men who had been shot previous to Joseph's murder.
Was an elderly individual who had a lifelong handicap in walking. He required a cane, and he had a severe limp when he walked. He worked as a dishwasher in a restaurant in Manhattan, and on a particular night that he was shot, he took the train home from Manhattan back to the East New York area of Brooklyn, where he lived. And he exits the train station, he starts walking home. He walks approximately 4 blocks when he's approached from the rear by an individual who doesn't say anything, shoots him once in the back, and runs away. Mr. Orozco suffered a serious gunshot wound to his back. He did recover from it over time, but it added to his previous handicap. He had more pain when he walked. He cooperated with us as the investigation went on. He was a very nice gentleman. German Montenegro was out partying the night he was shot in Manhattan, and he was I'll say more than a little intoxicated. He took the subway home. He lived in the East New York area of Brooklyn, and he exits the subway. He's walking home. He's approached from the rear as he gets close to his home, and he's shot once in the back also. He bled profusely. His father came to his aid. They were able to get him to the hospital, and he recovered fully. But once again, a serious gunshot wound to the back. Now, Mr. Montenegro was missing his passport. He believes it was taken during the shooting, and we believe that's how the Zodiac shooter obtained his birth date, and then he married it up with his astrological sign when he communicated with the media.
Now you have to put this into perspective. It's 1990, and Brooklyn, in particular the 7-5 precinct, which borders the street that Joseph Prolifone lived on, crime was rampant. Homicides were sky high. The crack epidemic was at its peak, and detectives in Brooklyn didn't have the luxury of time that detectives in the borough of Queens had. That particular precinct would investigate or catch 125 murders a year in that one police precinct. So if a victim was shot, survived, wouldn't get a whole lot of attention because they were up to their eyeballs in murder cases. There was not a large amount of investigation done on those first two shootings. And Chief Borelli was somewhat upset that more work hadn't been put into it. And he asked me what I had, and I had a pretty thick folder of reports, and we had more time than Brooklyn detectives did. And we put a little bit more work into our investigation. And at that point, he made a decision, and he gave me the case.
Detectives once again turned their attention to the notes written by the killer.
Two detectives from the NYPD's Major Case Squad, they had studied the note, and since we became aware the day before of those two shootings in Brooklyn, they figured out that all three of these shootings were on a Thursday, and they were all 21 days apart. And if he was going to hold true to that pattern, while we were having this meeting, after midnight, it would be the next 21-day Thursday night, Thursday morning cycle. And so when Chief Borelli was made aware of this, he pulled out all the stops and he said, "Mike, I'm going to give you all the resources you need." I think I had like 50 detectives with all kinds of unmarked vehicles, vans that look like ice cream trucks and things that wouldn't readily stand out as being a police vehicle, unmarked plainclothes sedans that we used, 2 detectives in each car. And we were basically going to take notice of whoever was walking the street between midnight and sunrise. And we did that, and we were in the area because all 3 of these shootings took place within 5 or 6 blocks of each other. And so we flooded that area, and we got out of the car and we talked. If we saw someone walking by himself with his hands in his pocket, we'd get out and stop and ask him to identify himself, and if we deemed it necessary, frisk that person to make sure they weren't carrying a weapon. And we pretty much did that all night long. And the sun came up and nothing happened. We went back to the 102nd precinct as I was doing some paperwork, because all the detectives had worked a double shift. And back in those days, the boss had to sign their overtime slips. And I'm sitting there signing overtime slips. And I got a call and said, "The reason you didn't get him last night in the area that you flooded is because he shot a man in Central Park. He shot Larry Parham, who had been sleeping on a park bench, who had been temporarily homeless."
And at the foot of the bench that Mr. Parham was sleeping on, there was a note left with 3 stones on that note also. So the officers, realizing the significance of the note, did not touch it. They waited for a crime scene unit to come, who recovered the letter, packaged it where there was no contamination to the letter, because they were going to take it to the lab where it could be examined for fingerprints, DNA, fibers, and hairs.
When that note was taken to the lab, they were able to recover 2 latent prints, an index and a thumb, which was good for the home team. Also, the bullet had passed right through his body and was lodged in the wood of the park bench. The park bench was right by the band shell in Central Park. So the bullet was brought to ballistics. Once again, his claim of no groove on bullet 9 millimeter or 380 RNL. He was true to his word. There was no striations, there was no grooves on the bullets, which then led us to believe that we might be dealing with a homemade zip gun with one-shot capability. But now that expanded the area greatly. You know, we were no longer confined to this little tight area on the Brooklyn-Queens border. So now, every 21 days, on Thursday nights, we had to put manpower and resources into Central Park area and the Brooklyn-Queens border. And we did that for a number of 3-week cycles all through the summer. And as a result of this fourth shooting, Chief Borelli formulated a Zodiac task force.
The self-dubbed Zodiac killer had targeted 4 different star signs so far. Mario Orozco, a Scorpio, Jermaine Montenegro, a Gemini, and Joseph Procci, a Taurus. The letter at Larry Parham's crime scene was marked with a 4th sign in the Zodiac wheel, Cancer. Larry had survived and was able to speak with detectives.
The detectives are interviewing him, and they're asking him, how did this guy possibly know your birth sign? And he says, well, I did have my wallet in my sneakers that were at the foot of the bench. It's possible he went into the wallet, saw my birth sign, and married it up to the accurate astrological sign. But then he says, you know, a couple of days before the shooting, I was in Central Park and I was hanging out on a bench, and another male sat down next to him, which is common. You know, people sit down on the benches and they talk. And he says, during the course of the conversation, birth dates came up. And he did tell this man his birthday. So the detectives are thinking maybe this was the Zodiac, and he was actually preparing to attack this guy at a future point in time, but he wanted to get his birth date and get his astrological sign. So they had a sketch artist do the sketch from the memory of Mr. Parham, and it turned out to be a heavy-set male black, and that sketch was widely disseminated. We called it the Al Roker sketch because Al Roker was a very popular weatherman in New York at the time, and that's what he resembled. I used to teach at the homicide course and the criminal investigation course, and I spoke about this particular event and this sketch. So sketches can be very valuable, provided you have a witness that actually witnesses the shooting or the murder or whatever the crime is. When you start to construct a sketch of an individual from a day or two before, and you're thinking that he might be the shooter, but it's really deductive reasoning that may not be accurate, and you put that sketch out, you're putting out potentially bad information. And when you put out bad information and you're asking the public for assistance, what are you going to get back? You're going to get back bad information. You're going to get people calling about a heavy-set male black that they're suspicious of or engaged in conversation. So we had 2 thick logs, 2 inches wide, of tips that came in based on the sketch. And each one of those tips had to be vetted, and it cost us a lot of man hours, a lot of time, expense, effort.
Inundated with tips leading nowhere and a killer still on the loose, the NYPD were drowning in paperwork and looking for solutions.
We were still typing these reports on electric typewriters. Nobody had cell phones. So it was a lot of good detectives working long hours working on this case. Someone could say, I think my neighbor is the Zodiac, and we would check that out. Go to that address, find out who that neighbor is, run a criminal history on that neighbor, write a report on that. And 3 weeks later, if someone else called in with that same thing, you know, you'd have duplication of effort. And so it was hard, you know, because there were so many thousands of reports being generated on tips that were coming in. There was a detective assigned to the chief of detective's office, and he was a pioneer in the IT field, and he came in with this very innovative piece of equipment. It was a scanner. They brought this scanner to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, to our office, and every report that was generated on a tip and a case, you could scan it through. It would take about a minute and a half for it to go through very slowly, but what it did, it enabled us to develop somewhat of a database. So if the name John Jones came in on tip number 523 and John Jones was mentioned again in tip 2000, it would match them up, and it made work a little bit easier for us. That was at the frontier of using computer equipment in an investigation. Another thing another piece of equipment that was very, very new was what they called the safest system. So the fingerprints used to be compared by fingerprint examiners under a loop, not a microscope, but a loop, to enlarge them to get a match. Now we had a computer that was doing this. So it became, now that we had those latent fingerprints belonging to whoever wrote the letter and left it on the park bench next to Larry Parham, those fingerprints would be run against every person who was arrested in New York City every single day, and still no match. And Chief Borelli had devoted a great many resources to this case, and then he went dormant, you know. So it was a little frustrating. So he had diminished the number of detectives devoted to the case, and we ran with about a dozen for a period of time, and still there were no shootings, and we needed more evidence. And then more months passed by. He didn't shoot anybody. He didn't claim to shoot anybody new. And the task force was disbanded. Everybody go back to your squads and go back to your regular work. So by that time, I was the commanding officer of the 115 squad in Jackson Heights, Queens. And I had my own homicide cases, and had 39 homicides there. We were busy with other work. And when a tip would come in related to the Zodiac, I would get the other two detectives from the task force, we'd get together and we'd check it out. But still, we weren't making any headway. And so in 1992, I retired from the NYPD. And a couple of years later, Zodiac sent another note.
It had been 4 years since law enforcement had heard from the Zodiac. Sergeant Joseph Herbert was assigned to the case.
The August 1st, 1994 letter was different than the other letters also. He basically conducts three parts of the letter. The upper left-hand portion of the letter is a series of maritime flags that he put into a code. When they broke down the code of the letter, it said, "This is the Zodiac speaking. I am in control. He who masters, there will be more. Yours truly." So in the coded letter, he's taking credit for being the Zodiac killer, and he's going to continue his attacks. The upper right-hand part of the letter are 5 documented victims, similar to the earlier letters, where he's giving a brief description of the date, the time, and a brief description of the victim, and sometimes he puts the caliber of the weapon, 9mm, .38, .380. So what I immediately started doing was tracking down the 5 victims that he's claiming in this letter. They all were in Highland Park. So Highland Park is a very large park. It borders both Queens, the 104 precinct, and Brooklyn, the 75 precinct. Of the 5 new victims that he's claiming, 1 is in the 75, that's the Diane Ballard shooting. 3 were in the 104, Joseph Diacone, a homicide, Patricia Fonte, a homicide, and Mr. James Weber, a non-fatal shooting. The 5th victim that he claimed in a letter, we looked high and low. We could not come up with that victim. We had helicopters fly above the park with heat-seeking devices. We had cadaver dogs. We canvassed the park excessively, looking for any sign of another victim. and we could not find it. So what we surmise is either he shot and missed his victim, or perhaps he grazed the victim and the victim didn't report it, or reported that it happened elsewhere. So we were only able to come up with 4 of the 5 victims in this new letter. On the bottom half of the letter, he's taunting the police. He puts the happy smiley face, Zodiac 9, and then he puts an unhappy face, NYPD 0. So he's bragging that he's outsmarting the NYPD. He's taunting the police in this letter. And as a result of that letter, and as a result of us marrying up 4 additional victims, upon further investigation of the ballistics that were recovered, there were no lands and no grooves in the bullets, we knew that it was in fact the Zodiac. So the NYPD at the time thought that not only had he stopped communicating with us, but that he had stopped perpetrating his attacks. But in fact, he was still shooting, wounding, and killing people. So, without benefit of a communication from him, detailing that these victims are his victims, they were investigated as individual crimes. They were not associated with the Zodiac crimes. I have to say here that at the time, we were still in the crack epidemic days, and in the East New York precinct where I worked, the 7-5 precinct at the time, we were averaging over 100 homicides a year, and on top of that, we were averaging 400 to 500 non-fatal shootings in 5 square miles. So the reason I tell you that is because we had 4 additional victims that were victims of the Zodiac whose ballistics was similar to the early events. But there was so much crime going on that without him leading us to these particular shootings, they never would have been connected by the NYPD.
Hoping to finally identify the man who had shot and killed 3 people and wounded 5 others, the NYPD formed a second Zodiac task force.
It was led by Inspector Michael Gardner, who I didn't know previously, and I never met such a dedicated investigator, an unbelievable boss. So he brought together seasoned detectives from Queens, because some of the bodies were in Queens, and also Brooklyn South, Brooklyn North and Brooklyn South. And they really recruited very senior talent, very experienced investigators. So when I get there, they had already located James Weber and convinced him to permit doctors to remove the bullet from his rear end, which they then realized had no lands and no grooves. So I knew right away these investigators did a real deal. The first thing I did was I read the files from 1990, 91, 92. Boxes. It took me about 2 days to finish reading it. And I took my notes. I'm a trained homicide investigator, and I concentrate on evidence. You'd think that everybody does, mostly they do, but I realized that the evidence that we had that was going to take us to a resolving the case was the fingerprint and the ballistics. We started doing a lot of work, interviewing people. We became regulars in Highland Park. There's a subculture in Highland Park, just like there's a subculture in probably every park in the world. People go there to party, people go there to do drugs, people go there to masturbate in the bushes. We were able to connect with all of these individuals that was going on. There was a lot going on in Highland Park besides the Zodiac. We realized that he had 2 comfort zones. The first comfort zone was the streets of both East New York on the border with Woodhaven, Queens, and that's where the first shootings happened. The second comfort zone was in Highland Park. These 2 comfort zones are about half a mile away from each other. In between these 2 comfort zone attacks was the Larry Parham shooting in Central Park. So what we assumed was that when he went into Central Park, he realized the park environment is a lot safer for him to do his dirty work than on the streets of New York City. It's darker, you can hide in bushes, you can hide behind trees, there's less pedestrian traffic, witnesses, there's very little vehicular traffic, less of a chance of cops driving by. So we believe that's what made him transition from the streets, the initial comfort zone, to Highland Park. And so what we did was, chasing the fingerprint, we devised a chart and we ran every address, a mile east, a mile west, a mile north, and a mile south of each of these comfort zones. And then we ran every address within that 4 square mile area. Once we had the addresses, we ran them for criminal histories, people that reside in those addresses with criminal histories. The reason we did that was because fingerprint databases were still kind of new at the time, and they had ran the fingerprint that was recovered from the letter to the databases with no hit. But they only put felonies in, and not all felonies. So we said to ourselves, we're cutting our chances in half by relying on the computer, because first of all, it was still kind of new. Second of all, they're not looking at misdemeanors, they're not looking at all felonies. So, we're minimizing our chances. So that's why we took it to do it manually. So we ran all the addresses, we came up with 4,500 names. We collected 4,500 fingerprint cards, and we coordinated with the forensics lab in Manhattan, and we gave them a major work assignment. 4,500 cards, 10 fingers on each card. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of manual examination, but they were able to get through them. And we worked very hard. We ran every lead that we could. We did some proactive work, chasing fingerprints, chasing ballistics. And from the August 1st, 1994 letter, there were no new attacks, ever. So after 9 months, the department decided to break up the second task force like they did the first task force. And we didn't want to break it up, the guys that were assigned to the task force. And a lot of us, we continued working it, even though we were sent back to our original commands. We were chasing leads and communicating with each other, and we would conduct investigations on our own without the task force being present. One piece of advice I would give to other departments that are investigating serial killers: they are long and hard, frustrating investigations. Even if you're not getting nowhere, don't break it up. Even if just leave a footprint, 2 detectives, 3 detectives, don't break it up. You need that continuity. So they broke it up.
Those men and women really worked hard on that case, but once again, no arrest had been made. They were unsuccessful.
We did not solve the Zodiac then.
With no further communication or crimes connected to the Zodiac, the case had hit another dead end. Until 2 years later, when the NYPD received a call.
I went back to the 7-5 Detective Squad. I was assigned to a training course to become a hostage negotiator. So I became a hostage negotiator. It was like a 3-week course, and I learned how to negotiate with people. I learned a lot more about weapons. I was transferred to the Brooklyn North Homicide Squad. So I was sitting in the Homicide Squad office on June 18, 1996. The phone rang about 12 noon, and they had a hostage job at 2730 Pickens Avenue, where an individual had shot his sister, and he was holding her boyfriend hostage in a back bedroom of the apartment. I raced there, got there as fast as I could, and when I arrived, the entire area was cordoned off. I was informed by the officers that were at the scene is that not only had he shot his sister and had the boyfriend still hostage in the back bedroom, but when responding police arrived, he shot it out with about 15 cops from his window. He had positioned guns. We later determined they were zip guns, but they're guns nonetheless, at each window in the apartment. And he would run from window to window, shooting at the cops below, the uniformed cops. Transit cops, 7-5 cops, anybody who responded, and they would shoot them back. So finally, emergency services arrived. They were able to cordon off the area. The gunfire ceased. He's still a hostage taker with a hostage. They had set up a bulletproof barrier in front of the building, and I was the first hostage negotiator that arrived, and I was assigned the role to speak with him.
Joseph tried to establish communication with the man, who identified himself as Eddie.
I was provided heavy ceramic bulletproof vest, heavy Kevlar helmet. I adorned my hostage negotiation windbreaker. It was about 100 degrees out that day, sweating like a dog. They provided me with a loudspeaker, so I was able to get behind the bulletproof barrier, and I was speaking to him, trying to get him to surrender. I was telling him, Eddie, enough blood has been shed. We don't need any more violence. You'll surrender. You won't be hurt. Your sister's going to be okay. Trying to lower the temperature and get him to surrender. He's not talking to me from the window. He would come to the window, he would point a long barrel weapon at me, and he had on his head a spaghetti strainer. I had the helmet, the Kevlar helmet, and he has a spaghetti strainer on his head. So that's what I was dealing with. So he wanted to communicate with me through the window, and finally they were able to evacuate the entire building, and we were able to climb into a first floor window, through the apartment, out that door, up the steps to Eddie's front door. And we set up the bulletproof barrier there, emergency service cops, and I started to try to get him to engage me in conversation then. So we were in the hallway for about 3 hours. I was saying the same thing, Eddie, enough blood's been shed, your sister's gonna be all right, let's end this now, no more people need to be hurt. So finally, he says, all right, am I going to go to jail? I said, Eddie, I can't lie to you. You're going to go to jail. You shot your sister, you shot at cops, it's a very serious thing going on. He says, I'll surrender, but you got to make one promise to me. I said, what's that, Eddie? He says, I don't want to go to Rikers Island. I said, Eddie, I'll do everything I can to coordinate with the prosecutors and the judges to try and get you anywhere but Rikers Island. I said, I can't control that, but I'll try. So then he tells us that he's ready to surrender. So I'm being advised by the emergency service cops that are in the hallway with me how to proceed. He tells them that he's got a lot of weapons inside the apartment, and a lot of ballistics, a lot of bullets, and they had emergency service people on the roof. They told me to tell Eddie that they'll lower the bucket to his front window, his kitchen window, and he can put all his weapons and bullets and everything into the bucket. It took 3 bucket loads to get all his pipes and zip guns and bullets out of the apartment. So now the emergency service guys are telling me that what we want him to do is unlock the door first, unlock the door, don't open it. Step about 2 feet in front of the door in his apartment with his back to the door. Emergency service is going to enter the door, and then he's going to have his hands in the air. They'll handcuff him, and they'll hand him to me, and I'll take him to the 7-5. Just before we were ready to do that, he says, I gave you all my guns. What should I do with my bombs? So I said, Eddie, you got bombs in there? So, we had already starting to relax a little bit out in the hallway because we know all the weapons are out. Everybody's behind the bulletproof barrier again because we didn't know what he's doing on the other side of the door. He's got bombs. So I conferred with the emergency service officers. They conferred with the bomb squad, and they told me, all right, tell him we'll do what we were going to do, leave the bombs alone. We'll get the hostage out of the apartment, and then we'll send the bomb squad in, and they can deal with the bombs. And that's what we did. So Eddie did as instructed. He unlocked the door, didn't open it, turned his back, hands in the air. Emergency service entered the apartment, handcuffed him to the rear, handed him to me, and I took him down to an awaiting squad car, and they transported us to the 7-5 precinct.
Police discovered that Eddie was in fact 28-year-old Heriberto Seda.
I take Eddie up to the detective squad, and I hand him off to Detective Dan Powers, who had caught the case of his sister being shot and the officer being shot at. So Danny took custody of him, brought him into the interrogation room. I had to go back to the hostage job because the bomb squad was arriving, and I had left my vehicle there, so I had to recover my vehicle. So I go back to the scene, and the bomb squad had arrived, and they had actually transported 2 pipe bombs out of the apartment and 1 smoke device and material to make additional bombs. He was going to graduate from a serial shooter to a serial bomber. So aside from just saving people from being shot, I think we probably saved people from getting bombed later on. So now I'm at the scene, and Danny Powers, who I handed Eddie off to at the 7-5 squad, arrived in a car with Detective Tom Marr. And they said, we want you to see this. It's a confession that Eddie had for shooting his sister. So it's a 2-page confession, and they hand it to me, and I'm reading it, the first page, and the handwriting jumped out at me as the handwriting that I've been studying for the last 4 years, 5 years, of the Zodiac shooter communicating with the media. I turned to the second page, and at the bottom of the second page, he has an upside-down cross, which he had on some of the letters that he wrote to the media, and there were 7s at the bottom 3 points on his confession. He had 6s on the bottom 3 points of the letters that he sent. I said, as sure as I'm standing here, this is the Zodiac.
He just couldn't help himself. He had to put that circle with the crosshairs, which was on many of his notes that he had sent to the press, to the police. And when Joe Herbert saw that, it jumped off the page.
Everything starts fitting together. The zip guns, the location, he's close to the park. I knew that it was his handwriting, but I'm not a handwriting expert, and that was not going to be sufficient evidence to charge him. So we knew we had the fingerprint, had Tommy Marr roll his fingerprints, and he ran them into Detective Ronald Longis in the Layton squad in Manhattan. He identified the fingerprint as Eddie Seda's fingerprints. We transferred the ballistic evidence that was recovered from his apartment, and they were able to match those ballistics, those pipes. Although he didn't have lands and grooves in his weapons, he didn't know it, was that when a bullet travels through a pipe, even if it doesn't have the lands and grooves, it still leaves distinctive marks, nicks, scrapings, whatever, on the bullet. So they were able to identify 3 of the bullets from victims of the Zodiac that we recovered from the victims with some of the pipes and zip guns that we took out of his apartment. Also, we were able to match his DNA. He had licked one of the letters that he sent to either the Post or 60 Minutes, and it matched his DNA when we took his sample. And then we had handwriting analysis done by a handwriting expert, and he stated that the handwriting is in fact Heriberto Seda's. So what we also did that day was interrogate him. Once we knew we had him, we wanted to see if we could get a confession out of him.
And I had always said that this case is going to be solved by way of a fluke, something bizarre happening, like maybe he'll jump over a turnstile to evade the fare on the subway, and a cop will grab him and arrest him, and they'll fingerprint him, and then they'll say, bing, we have a match. Well, it didn't happen quite that way.
So Louis Savarese, myself, and Tommy Marr went into the interrogation room with Eddie Seda, and we confronted him. We told him, listen, we know you're the Zodiac. We got your handwriting, we got your fingerprints. And he said, no, I'm not the Zodiac. I'm not, I don't know what you're talking about, I'm not the Zodiac. All he wanted to talk about initially was the Bible and religion. He had a St. James Bible with him that he took out of his apartment. Eventually, he realized, we were telling him about the evidence that we had, and he knew that we knew the case cold. He knew the way we were talking. We knew what we were talking about. We knew that case. We lived that case for years. So he finally confessed, and he started with Patricia Fonte. He states, "I saw her get off the bus on Jamaica Avenue, and I engaged her in conversation. She asked me for a cigarette. I lured her up to the reservoir area in Highland Park, and that's where I attacked her. I stabbed her, I shot her, and then he took us through all the other crime victims, and he admitted to his crimes." So at the end of the day, we had latent evidence, ballistic evidence, handwriting evidence, DNA, and a confession.
With hindsight, Joseph realised just how close his task force had come to identifying Heriberto Seda 2 years prior, when they took the fingerprints from the occupants of some 4,500 addresses.
1,500 of the names that we submitted, that we recovered from those addresses, had sealed records. So that meant that when they went to court, for whatever reason, the case was dismissed and the judge sealed the case, the fingerprints were not distributed to the police. They were sealed. You can't access them. Heriberto Seda, he had been arrested for a zip gun that when it went to the ballistics lab, they couldn't put it together properly, so the gun was deemed inoperable. The district attorney dismissed the case. His fingerprint card was sealed. His name was in 4,500. Of the 1,500 were sealed, in order to unseal them, you need a reason to unseal it. You can't just blanket request 1,500 unsealings because that's why they're sealed, because they're being protected. So we didn't have any particular information on any of the 1,500 that was sealed. So we lost an opportunity to identify him through common sense investigative effort.
After years of searching for the Zodiac, Joseph was surprised by the man who was finally sat in front of him.
He struck me, first of all, I envisioned an older male, in my mind prior to the apprehension. I was surprised that he was as young as he was. He was in his late 20s when we arrested him, but that meant that he was in his early 20s when he started. He was religious. I mean, it wasn't an act. He believed that he was ridding society of drug-addicted people. He actually had provided uniformed officers in the 7-5 information on drug dealers that he saw in the neighborhood. He was a unique character. There was no sex involved with him. Usually serial killers, there's some kind of motivation besides just media attention. Oftentimes it's sex. Most of his attacks were hit and run. It was a bit of a challenge, and oftentimes serial killers, they stick with the same race, they stick with the same gender. What the Zodiac was doing, he was doing males, females, black, white, Spanish. He had no specific target. I think it was just the best opportunity that he had, where he thought he could get away with it.
On May the 14th, 1998, 30-year-old Heriberto Seda's trial began. He was charged with 3 murders and 1 attempted murder in the Queens district of New York. Seda was found guilty and sentenced to 83 years in prison. The following year, Seda also stood trial in Brooklyn, charged with 8 attempted murders, including that of his sister. Seda was once again found guilty and sentenced to an additional 152 years.
In my heart of hearts, he intended to kill every single person that he attacked. And in his letters, even though some victims survived, he still called them kills. He said the first sign is dead, the second sign is dead, even though they survived. In his mind, they were dead, but he wanted to kill them. There was no doubt in my mind. And he had shot 9. In his communications, he's threatening to shoot at least 3 more, because he's saying he's going to kill 1 for every sign of the Zodiac. There's 12 signs of the Zodiac. I believe that if he did, in fact, hit the number 12, that he would continue. He wasn't ending. Although he might have just graduated to the bombs. I knew we didn't hear the end of him, and I knew it wasn't going to end with him until he was in custody. You know, his being the copycat Zodiac was who he was. It was in his DNA. It was in his soul, in his heart. He wasn't getting away from that. He had nothing else in life. You know, he didn't work. You know, it's all he had. It was his identity, and he liked the attention. He liked the media. He liked the results.
Joseph Herbert proudly served in the NYPD for 32 years. He passed away in September 2025.
A lot of men and women worked tirelessly on that case. Doesn't matter if I got him or another detective did it. You know, it was a team effort, and that's why I think the NYPD is the best police agency on the planet, and in particular, the New York City detectives, in my way of thinking, are the best detectives in the world.
Heriberto Seda terrorised New York City for 6 years before finally being captured in a bizarre standoff with police. Seda is still serving out his 235-year sentence at the Clinton Correctional Facility in upstate New York.
The safest place for the world is for him to be in prison, away from everyone else.
Lonnie Franklin, also known as the Grim Sleeper, an American father who murdered at least 10 people over a 20-year period.
Franklin is not only evil, he's a monster, just because of the effect he had on so many families.
Hi, I'm Nick from True Crime Uncut. Welcome to Questions With. This week we're speaking with retired Los Angeles detective Clifford Shepard and retired LAPD officer Paul Coulter. When did you first get involved in this case?
November of 2001, Los Angeles Police started a cold case unit for unsolved murders. We had somewhere between 6,000 to 9,000 unsolved murders between 1960 and the present. My boss, David Lampkin, was involved with DNA and sexual assault crimes, so he was very aware of the technology and what was being done at that time in the state of California as far as the creation of the databases. And he thought we could use the technology from today and apply it to those unsolved murders and solve some of them. When I started looking at the cases from the 80s, we had 6 victims, or thought we had 6 victims. We started comparing them and finding out that bullets from this murder also were fired from the same gun in this murder. And by the second or third murder, they were aware that we had somebody out there, apparently a serial murderer, who was killing these girls. I was aware of that, and I said, yeah, you know, as a matter of fact, some cases I was looking at, I can go back and see what we have and then try to get some analysis done, and we'll see.
What did you first notice about the murders in the 80s?
We had a couple of problems. The major problem was cocaine. Rock cocaine was rampant. The cocaine seemed to bring out the worst in a person, rage, and especially with some men, that they just decided that they had to murder somebody, usually the victim they just had sex with.
In the 1980s, there were a lot of young ladies being found murdered in South Central LA. Those were separated out from the large numbers of women because they had all been shot in the chest. And ballistically, they had all been shot with the same .25 caliber. This little series of young ladies that had been shot with were singled out, and they were labeled as the .25 caliber killings.
And that began with the investigation into Lonnie Franklin, not knowing it was Lonnie Franklin at the time. But it began with a woman named Deborah Jackson.
She was found in an alley, I think, by a couple young kids walking their dogs. She'd been shot in the chest, which all of these victims had all been shot in the chest. All of these young gals were found in alleyways. She was the first known victim, August 10th of 1985. Henrietta Wright was the second known victim in this .25 caliber series. She had also been shot with a .25 caliber handgun. She'd been shot in the chest, which was the similarities to Deborah Jackson. The ballistics came back in 85 that it was the same weapon.
When I looked at these cases, I saw that 2 of the women had DNA evidence. Sexual assault kits had been collected, and they were analyzed, and there was DNA present. So with that, I mean, okay, great. Now we can get somewhere, I thought. So I request analyzation on the evidence. And late 2004, I was notified that 2 of the victims from that series matched a woman who was murdered in 2003 by the name of Valerie McCorvey.
Valerie McCorvey was found in the roadway adjacent to an alley near a school. She is found fully clothed with her breasts exposed, and her cause of death was ligature strangulation, and it appeared she was just dumped there in the roadway.
The detectives had thought this guy who was murdering this group in the 80s, between about 1982 and 1988, that he had stopped for whatever reasons. He was in prison, he left the state, decided to quit. But with that analysis and revealing that there was another victim more current, he's still out there. The problem was his DNA was not in the database. We just knew the DNA connected those 3 or 4 murders at that time. And then as the months passed, more murders were added. And I think one was from the city of Inglewood, which was Princess Bartholomew. He was the next victim that we were aware of, about 2005. So our problem was he's not identified.
What new evidence reignited the investigation?
We had one survivor who the man had shot in 1988, left her for dead, and she was able to crawl away to a friend's house, actually, and seek help. With that, we were able to get a description of a black man in his 20s. It was nothing unique, but it was a start. With that and the DNA, we started reviewing cases, started making contacts, re-interviewing people, looking for anything that could identify a particular person. The problem was most of our victims were unwitnessed murders. They were the only one who saw that, except for the murderer. Initially, when I was looking at the first 6 murders, we were looking for other murders that could be involved. And then we had to find cases that could be. We had to see what the evidence was. And if the evidence had not been submitted for an analyzation, we had to have that analyzed. And then we were looking for somebody who fit the vague profile of a black man in South Los Angeles who was violent with women. Janisha Peters is one of the last victims that we're aware of. We know she was alive the night of New Year's Eve, 2006-7. Then her body is found New Year's Day in a trash bag in a dumpster around 94th Street in Western, which is near where Bernita Sparks was found. What we learned later on, he would either find his victims off of Western or he would leave their bodies along Western.
He was always in that little bubble down there off of Western Avenue.
Larkeisha Jefferson was last seen alive with her sister that last saw her in her apartment, which is located right there at 81st and Western. Larkeisha's body is found, I think, down near 104th in Normandy, a couple miles away, but it's all right there. All the victims or most of the victims are found up and down Western. This guy that lives right there, he's probably going to be our murderer.
Detectives needed to find the killer fast before yet another innocent victim was killed. Before we continue with this video, please do click that thumbs up icon and remember to subscribe as it really helps the channel. But for now, let's get back to the case of the Grim Sleeper. How was the killer identified?
Well, with Anitra, she was walking down one of the streets in the area when this orange Pinto pulled up, and he was persistent in trying to get her into the vehicle. Finally, she decided, okay, I'm going to a party. He says, hey, well, can I go? And eventually, his persistence paid off. She gets in the vehicle. And as she's riding, he pulls down 81st Street and pulls over to the curb and tells her, hey, I have to go get some money. So she says, okay. She waits in the vehicle while she sees him go across the street to a residence. He comes back, gets in the car, and as he turns onto Western to go to this party, all of a sudden she says she felt a pain in her chest. And she's like, hey, did you just shoot me? And he's like, shut up, bitch. I'll shoot you again. He drives around. He dumps her in a front yard of a residence. It turns out to be a lady that she knows, and he sexually assaults her. I mean, luckily, she survives. She's taken to the county UCLA hospital, and she goes into surgery, and the bullet is removed. Turns out it's the same gun used in the 85 or 80 series, the 25 caliber. Her description of what happened was like the framework of what happened to all these other victims. All of these other victims from the 85 series are all shot in the left side of the chest. The trajectories are all left to right. They're all front to back. They are all slightly downward. She'd been fully clothed when she was found, just like the other victims. So now they had, the detectives in the 25 calibers had not only a surviving victim that could tell them what happened, they had a description of his vehicle, which was the orange Ford Pinto. Composites were done of the suspect. Things were going on. They had a location that they thought. A search warrant was done on the residence that Anitra thought she saw him go to. And it turned up nothing. Turns out, once you know who your suspect is, that Franklin lived 3 doors down. That's how close they were to him in 1988. 3 doors away is where he actually lived. They set up surveillance units across the street in a gas station to watch 81st looking for an orange Pinto that never materialized. The task force did searches of every vehicle citation, every field interview card, every crime report, things of that nature, trying to identify the driver of this orange Pinto, and they were striking out. It never came back. And in 2010, it was the idea of Jill Spriggs, who at that time was in charge of all the crime labs in the state of California for DOJ. She had come up with the idea of doing this familial search and based it basically off of this case, trying to identify the suspect. The sperm frag recovered from the oral swab from Barbara Ware was sent to Cellmark, where the male profile was separated from our DNA profile. And then they searched the convicted felon database in California for male relatives of your suspect. It turns out Lonnie's son, Christopher, was arrested in 2009 for a gun narcotics charge in the city of Inglewood. He pled guilty to a felony, the gun charge, therefore making him a convicted felon. And he had to be swabbed, and his sample got uploaded into the databank, convicted felon databank. And in 2010, when we reran it, by then, now we hit on a male relative.
They did some tests within the department. Initially, they looked at a couple hundred profiles. Ultimately, we got a match to a son. And we were warned, you do not arrest the son. You do not talk to the son. But your murder is someone who is related to this man. So it could be his father, could be an uncle, could be a brother. We have to find out. They did initially some work on him. They came up with some family information. And when we looked at his father's address, it's him. His father lived right there on 81st Street. Anitria Washington told us she was taken to 81st Street. The guy got out of the car to get something. He went to his house. Now, the next problem was we have to obtain a DNA sample from him and then compare that to the murders. to make sure it is him. So we have surveillance teams that were put on him immediately. They were watching him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the first few days, we were coming up empty. The surveillance teams were watching him, and he's not doing anything unusual. He was seen getting into his car and driving up and down Western one night, which presented a problem to us. And we can't let him take another woman into a car and drive off with her. We can't have him murder somebody right under our nose. I think it was the next day he and some people went out to a pizza store. I had a pizza, and he left some behind. One of the surveillance team members acted as if he was working at that store, cleaned up the plate and on some of the discarded pizza, brought it back with him. We had it analyzed, and it took about 3 days, but with that, we had him. The DNA matched perfectly, and that's what we needed. Now we know Lonnie Franklin is our man.
How did you arrest Franklin?
Metro units were ordered to go in and scoop him up and then take him downtown for an interview. And he did. He was surprised. Caught him totally off guard. He was interviewed, and our detectives were versed at that time on the victims and had photographs and everything, and confronted him with all the victims, and that he denied, of course, knowing or killing anyone. When we arrested him, we already had planned to conduct a search of his residence. We'd be negligent if we didn't. We're looking for weapons. We're looking for clothing that he may have kept. These guys, some of them have trophies. Some of them keep items of jewelry or other things they take from the victims. So a search warrant was prepared, and that morning, the morning of his arrest, was served on his residence. We wanted to go through the house. We wanted to go through everything that he had. We're looking for any evidence that we can that will connect him to these murders too. What we found almost immediately, we found there was a firearm in one of the jacket pockets that was in a closet. It was the right caliber in that. We had teams going through the garage. While going through the garage, we found photographs. Some of the photographs he had hidden behind a wall. We found a Polaroid picture of Anitria seated, bleeding from her chest, seated in the seat of a car, probably the Pinto. Confirmed her story. Photographs of other women. We found identification for 2 girls that are still missing. Now, they were reported missing by their families. We have never found them. We haven't found their bodies. Are they dead? Most likely they are. By now, we should have found them, or they should have been approaching their families.
When we interviewed Franklin, we're confronting him with the DNA on each victim, and one you could maybe explain, 2, maybe coincidence. When you start getting into those numbers, then when you find that Polaroid photo of Anitra Washington, there is no way you're going to explain that away. So when we saw that, it was like, stop everything. We want every photograph that we have checked for biological evidence. As I took each 8x10 photograph, put in front of him, he denied knowing any of those victims.
This young lady, her name is Henrietta Wright. Go ahead, take a close look. No recollection at all. No recollection, or you just don't know?
I don't know her. But ugly, I don't know her. So,
What?
But ugly, I don't know her. Sorry, I don't know her.
And of course, these photos had been on billboards up and down Western Avenue. They had been in the news. I don't know how he missed it, but he just denied knowing him. I think he mentioned one was butt ugly, which the family didn't really appreciate during the trial, which I understand.
What did you learn about Franklin's background and prior offences?
Lonnie was known as the little mechanic for the neighborhood, and he would buy cars from the salvage yards, fix them, and then flip them, with never really registering them in his names. He would usually keep cold plates and use those on those cars. And I think that's where he got caught a few times. Lonnie's prior criminal history consisted mainly of auto theft, receiving stolen property, some assaults. He grew up not far from his residence in South Central. He joined the military, was in the U.S. Army in the late 70s. And we did find through his military records that his activities with the women started even then. Him and 2 other GIs kidnapped some young ladies, or attempted to kidnap one off a trolley stop in Germany. And then they did kidnap another young lady and gang raped her and took photos, just like he did in the 80s.
How did Franklin's knowledge of the city help him avoid detection for so long?
When he was released, he came back to Los Angeles, and that's when he met his wife. And that was the late 70s, early 80s. Now, that period we don't know a lot about. He's working as a mechanic or a mechanic's assistant for the city of Los Angeles. He's actually working in the police station downtown in Central Division. He left the police department, still working for the city, and went to the sanitation department. They paid better, and that entailed going up and down alleyways, picking up that time the trash cans and dumping them into their vehicle. At some point, he went off on a injury and was able to receive a disability pension. So he didn't work for years. That would never worked again, I think, except around his house in the neighborhood for his friends and neighbors repairing cars. We had no complaints from anyone that we saw. We found no reports of him assaulting any other women. People that we interviewed in the neighborhood just said, no, he's a quiet guy and he's pretty much stays to himself.
What made Franklin one of the most evil killers?
The reason I think Lonnie David Franklin's one of the most prolific serial killers is because of the sheer numbers, not only that we know about, but that we don't know about because they ended up in landfills. I don't know that we'll ever know how many he actually killed. In my belief, yeah, there are other victims. I mean, again, it would be arrogant for us to say we know of all the people he killed. And yeah, I'm sure there are other ones.
Lonnie Franklin and evil. Can you go out and murder, 15, 20 people and not be? Exactly why he chose these particular victims to murder, I don't know. It's obvious to me that he doesn't care about anybody else. He's somebody, he'd be up there as far as with Hannibal Lecter, as far as someone who's evil and someone you should fear. You're never going to be able to change him. The safest place for the world is for him to be in prison, away from everyone else.
On June the 6th, 2016, Lonnie Franklin was convicted of 10 murders and sentenced to death. Less than 4 years later, on March the 28th, 2020, the 67-year-old was found dead in his cell. Franklin's cause of death has never been publicly released.
There were 2 young children that were out riding their bicycles. And as fate would have it, they run across a body. This was a body of a human being.
When bodies started appearing along highways in central Florida, it wasn't immediately obvious that an active serial killer was on the loose.
It took law enforcement quite a while to make a determination that it was a female that we were looking for.
Eileen Warnos, known as America's first female serial killer.
With each victim, the rage increased a little bit more. Her next victim was shot 6 times. The victim after that was shot 9 times. She actually emptied the gun at him.
Warnos posed as a hitchhiker, luring wealthy men off the highway for sex before killing and robbing them.
She was a predator. She was out finding her victims. It wasn't a lover's quarrel. It wasn't family related. She was actually a predator.
You got somebody out there that's killed 7 people. If that's not incentive enough to bust your ass and do your job and catch them, then you don't need to be a cop.
Our patrol division had come upon a vehicle that was abandoned on I-75. It was in the southbound lane on the shoulder. It had a flat tire. And when they ran the VIN number on the vehicle, it came back to David Spears, who had been reported a missing person. Our patrol division contacted me and asked what they should do with the vehicle. Because it was an active investigation for the missing person,
construction worker David Spears was last seen by his son leaving work at midday on May the 19th. When the 43-year-old didn't turn up to meet his ex-wife, David was reported missing.
we advised the patrol division to secure the scene, and we brought a team of detectives up there. There was no real evidence in the car, but we noticed that there was property that was missing.
On June the 1st, 1990, a naked body was found along Route 19. Dental records identified it as being that of David Spears.
The body was found in Citrus County, so they were working the actual homicide end of it. David Spears was shot 6 times, but that was our involvement recovering the vehicle.
With the David Spears homicide investigation taking place in neighbouring Citrus County, the Marion County Sheriff's Office had no more to do with the case until another vehicle was found abandoned.
There was one other vehicle we recovered on I-75, and it was a similar set of circumstances where he had been reported missing. And our patrol division came upon the car. Again, it was abandoned on the side of the interstate, so we secured it and searched the scene.
The vehicle belonged to Charles Cascadden, a 40-year-old part-time rodeo worker.
He was traveling back from St. Louis. He had been up there visiting his mother, and he drove back from St. Louis to the Tampa area where he was living with his fiancée.
Charles's body was found in Pasco County.
The victim was shot 9 times.
Personal effects were removed from him, personal items as well that were eventually found in a pawn shop over in Daytona.
It wasn't long before another abandoned vehicle appeared.
It was around the July 4th weekend, and we had received a telephone call through our 911 center that a vehicle had crashed in the community of Orange Springs, Florida. And walking away from that vehicle were 2 women. We have deputies that go to the crime scene, and the vehicle obviously had been crashed. What was noteworthy was that the tag had been removed from that vehicle.
When we got up there, we found that it belonged to another missing person, Peter Sims, when we ran the VIN number. And we thought maybe he was up there somewhere.
Peter Sims was a 65-year-old missionary from Jupiter, Florida, who'd left his home a month earlier to visit family.
His intent was to drive up to New Jersey to pay his brother a visit. And from there, he had planned on going over to Arkansas and visit his mom. He had a number of Bibles in the car with him. He was going to pass them out along the way. But he never made it to New Jersey.
Peter Sims had seemingly vanished into thin air.
It was a long time that we spent up there, looking for Peter Sims' body, looking for any type of evidence.
Just 26 days later, the Marion County Sheriff's Office received a call about a local man who hadn't returned home from work.
Troy Burris was from here in Marion County, Florida. He worked for a sausage delivery company called Gilchrist Sausage. And early in the morning, his truck was loaded up and he used to go out on the delivery route. He had made some of his deliveries.
This route took him out to Daytona Beach, and he made stops along the way. And then when he got to Daytona, he headed north up into Ormond Beach. Made a few stops up there, turned around, started coming back. And somewhere along the way, when he was returning to the plant, he disappeared.
He never returned home that evening from his shift. And the family reported him overdue missing.
We were able to isolate the location to an area known as Seville, which is about midway between Daytona Beach and Ocala. We put out what we call a bolo, be on the lookout for his truck. We started looking for it, and about 2 o'clock the next morning, one of our deputies came upon his truck, and it had been abandoned at the intersection of State Route 40 and 19, which was out in the Ocala National Forest, a very isolated area. So at this point, we have another missing person. We have no idea what happened to him. A few days later, a couple of people came up from the Space Coast area, which is down around Cocoa Beach. They were looking to have a picnic at one of our large lakes out in the Ocala National Forest. When they got there, it was extremely busy. The parking was gone, and they didn't want to fight with the crowds. They just wanted to have a quiet little picnic lunch. So they continued north about 3 miles, and they found a small fire lane that went off into the woods. And it went into the forest, maybe a half, 3/4 of a mile. They stopped at a little clearing they thought would be big enough to have their lunch at. And when they got out of the car, 2 things really happened at that point. They noticed the air didn't smell fresh. There was something unique about it. And the other thing was, off in the distance, in the weeds, they could see something that just didn't seem like it fit, because everything else around them was green. This was blue. They walked over to look, and it was a pair of jeans. The pair of jeans were on a decomposing body. So they contacted us, and we went up there, and we recovered the body. Fortunately, he still had his work shirt on. So on his pocket, it said Gilchrist Sausage, and it said Troy, his first name. So we now knew who we had, and it made it a little bit easier to confirm it.
5 days after his disappearance, detectives had to break the news to Troy's family. He'd been shot twice at point-blank range.
Now we had our first body in Marion County. And on cases like this, you try and work the investigation from the time the body's found backwards, so that you can look at their last moments and where they might have been, what they might have done. We did a road check at the location that his truck had been found at, stopping motorists, talking to them to see if there had been anything that out of the ordinary. Maybe somebody saw his truck or saw somebody with it. And the only thing we came out of that with was there was one individual that reported seeing a hitchhiker. And they said this hitchhiker was hitching north from where the truck was abandoned up somewhere into the Ocala forest. We found out who the hitchhiker was, and we interviewed him, and that turned out to be a dead lead. We also ran his route. We actually left the delivery plant at the same time he did, 6:20 in the morning. We stopped at every location he went to, every store, every supermarket. We went all the way out to Daytona, up into Ormond, came back. That was how we isolated where he was last seen. When we got to Seville, we talked to the clerk there, and the clerk said he was here just like normal. It was just his regular delivery day. When we went to his next stop, he had never arrived there. So that was how we isolated the location. So we knew a little bit about what was going on in Citrus County with the investigation into David Spears, and Pasco County with Charles Carscat, and because we had recovered the vehicles, but we still weren't in the loop, as it were. If things had been done differently, maybe the ballistics would have shown us a match and we could have tied it together. But because of the way the state was organized at the time, regionalized, I should say, we didn't come upon that connection. We followed up on a lot of leads. We tried to come up with a lot of information, but we were just coming up empty-handed. And I can remember how frustrating it was, just coming up with nothing time after time again. But what really tied things together was that when Troy Burris was killed, the detective that was assigned to the case as the lead investigator in Marion County, he started going through bulletins for unsolved homicides in the state. And he came upon these two cases, and he looked at the circumstances involving Citrus County and Pasco County, and he said, well, they all involve a .22. Maybe there's something here. So the three detectives got together from those three agencies, and they compared notes. And they found that there was a lot more to compare than just the .22 caliber connection. There were the vehicles that had been recovered had a lot of similarities. The license plates had been removed. The inside of the vehicles had been wiped clean. In some of them, you could see the streaks from where they had wiped it. Items had been taken from the vehicle, and the vehicles were left on abandoned major roadways usually. So there were a lot of similarities now. And we started looking at it saying, could these be tied together? Now, at this particular time, we had the Gainesville murders. A lot of panic because of the way the bodies were found, the way things turned up. There was a lot of panic in Gainesville over this. We didn't want to jump to any conclusions and say, okay, we have yet another serial killer in Central Florida. So we wanted to work it a little farther to try and tie things together a little bit better so that we could know what we had before we jumped to a conclusion.
Just 39 days after the discovery of Troy Burrows' body, the Marion County Sheriff's Office received another call.
I was the homicide detective on call that week. There were two young children that were out in this undeveloped subdivision riding their bicycles. And as fate would have it, they run across a body. And when they realized this was a body of a human being, they pedaled home. They told their parents. Their parents called 911 to notify law enforcement. A uniformed patrol, deputies arrived. They secured the crime scene from any further contamination. And then I was contacted by our communications center. Once I received the call, I traveled to the location, which is in southwest Marion County, Florida, just off of I-75. And it was there I had my first contact with the remains of Richard Humphreys. When I arrived at the Humphreys crime scene, it was late in the evening. It had not yet gotten dark, but we worked literally all night long. You could tell that he had been there for a little while. You could also tell that his pockets had been turned inside out. That's indicative of robbery. And an initial examination of his remains indicated that he had been shot multiple times, some in the back, some in the front. And what was most significant from the gunshot wounds was the physical evidence that suggested that one of the injuries, or the gunshot injury, was what we call a close non-contact gunshot wound, meaning that when the weapon was discharged, it was only just a few inches from his body. And that particular gunshot wound was to his chest. When you looked at his clothing, he had some stains on his knees. You had evidence that would suggest that he was probably moving around, flailing on the ground. And to take a long shot here, I'm going to say that was the last gunshot wound. And I hate to say it this way, but that was to put him out of his misery. We were not able to identify Mr. Humphreys immediately. So for us, he was a John Doe. We had no idea who he was. We checked our databases. No one fitting his description had been reported missing. Then we started to check with adjoining counties to see if anyone fitting his description had been reported missing. And it was late that evening that we had learned from the Sumter County, Florida Sheriff's Office that they had actually taken a missing persons report of Richard Humphreys. 2 detectives from the Sumter County Sheriff's Office who personally knew Mr. Humphreys eventually responded to our location, and a personal identification was made by these detectives of the remains of Mr. Humphreys. Once we got that information, it allowed us to really jump into this thing with both feet. Now we knew who he was, we knew where he worked, and we spoke with his supervisor, and we had learned that he was an investigator for the state of Florida working in protective services, specifically child abuse and neglect investigations. He was a retired military person. After his distinguished career within the military, he went into law enforcement, and eventually he became a police chief in a small town called Sylacauga, Alabama. Once the investigative team learned that, it was pretty tough. It was one of our own that was a victim of a homicide. But you can't let that impact your objectivity in working this case. Your job is to go out, identify any and all evidence connected, and then identify who was responsible for this case, and then bring that person to justice. We were able to gather his schedule for the days prior, the people that he was to make contact with. We were able to go interview those people to see if he did make contact with them. We were working on putting together a timeline so we could piece together, if we had to, minute by minute, the travels of Mr. Humphreys for those last 24 hours of his life. The following morning, I broke away from the interviews and I traveled to the office of the medical examiner, where I personally attended the autopsy of Mr. Humphreys. And basically, that was a very crucial part of the investigation, because we examined the body head to toe, front to back. We're looking for literally everything: hairs, fibers, trace evidence, anything that would be indicative of a struggle that had taken place. And also, we were able to absolutely determine that he had been shot multiple times.
Despite an extensive and thorough investigation, the Marion County Sheriff's Office was struggling to find out what happened to Richard Humphreys.
We had no idea. We had no leads. We had no suspects. We had no idea who the killer was in his case.
By the time Mr. Humphreys was killed, we had thought about there being a connection. So we had contacted every agency in Central Florida, whether it was on a local, state, or federal level. And we said, let's come in and meet, let's talk, let's share ideas, let's find out something. And I can remember my hope was that somebody had information that we didn't, because we didn't know anything. We were almost in the dark on this, and it was very frustrating.
And then just a matter of a couple of weeks later, we're actually having a meeting at our office and comparing the cases.
So my hope was that somebody had some information. When everybody came in, we found out they did. Volusia County had the first killing, and we hadn't accounted for that yet because it was 6 months earlier. So we actually missed the first one. Now this was drawn into the mix. Now information's coming together.
Detectives learned that on December the 13th, 1989, the body of 51-year-old Richard Mallory was found in a wooded area.
Richard Mallory was found shot to death in Volusia County, Florida, over near Daytona. He was an electronics shop repairman. His body was found, it was very decomposed.
Richard's car had been found abandoned 13 days earlier.
It was literally that case that said, Houston, we have a problem. Now we're starting to really connect these dots, connect these cases together. The biggest thing that we focused on was the victimology, the crime scene, and the associated evidence, such as the victim shot multiple times with a small caliber weapon. It was too much to overlook.
Detectives hoped this new, likely connected case would lead them to the killer.
There were a couple things that led us into believing that we were possibly looking for women. Some other things came into play that we started looking at. Number one, the fact that it was a smaller caliber weapon. 22 caliber, lighter weapon, not as much kickback. That might be something a woman would use. Number two, every vehicle had the driver's side seat in the forwardmost position when we recovered it. So now we're thinking, okay, maybe we are looking at somebody that's shorter or smaller. Smaller gun, smaller person, and maybe we are in fact looking for women. And we didn't know, but it was just a line of thought that we pursued. A lot of times when you're working a homicide investigation, you have leads to go on, you have witnesses, you have connections maybe with family or something. And in this case, we weren't coming up with any of that. And nationwide, when you look at your violent crimes, homicide has about the highest closure rate of any of the crimes that we have. So you would think you'd have something to work with. And time after time, these cases are coming in and we're getting nothing.
Once the homicide task force began to meet, there were so many ideas that were thrown on the table as to where we need to look. And one of the cases that the task force went back to look at was the case involving Peter Sims. And we were perplexed with that case because we had not located his body, but he was a middle-aged white male. And you had this vehicle that had been involved in a crash. The tag had been removed like the other victim's vehicle that we had identified and recovered. And the biggest piece of evidence in that case was we had eyewitnesses that seen these two females leaving the scene of that crash. And you have to give the investigator credit that worked the initial phases of that investigation, because he had these witnesses come to our office, met with our forensic artist, and composite sketches were created. Those sketches remained in the Sims case file for several months until the task force said, let's look at this case, look at the similarities.
We knew now we're looking at something that may be connected. We're trying again to connect the dots here. And then we had our 7th killing.
Walter Gino Antonio, he was murdered in November of 1990. And also, he had a law enforcement background. He was a reserve deputy sheriff with the Brevard County Sheriff's Office. And some of the things that were taken from him, personal effects, were like a set of handcuffs and a flashlight.
His body had been found in Dixie County. Up until this point, we were debating whether or not we wanted to release those composites. We had to decide as a team what we wanted to do. And we had to look at the pros and the cons. And on the side of the pros, if we release them, maybe we'll get some names, because we didn't even have names at this point. On the other side, we thought maybe there's going to be more panic if we release this. Maybe the girls will leave the area. If they see the news, maybe they'll go to another state and we'll never know who they were. Plus, the fact that the composite drawings that we were talking about releasing, we didn't have a body to go with them. Well, all we had was a missing person report. So we didn't know that we had that .22 caliber connection. It was just the other things about the man and his profile and his vehicle seemed similar. We said, let's go ahead and release it. We got to give it a try. We've got to get this to stop. And we hoped for the best.
A tip line number was set up. We actually had 2 detectives working around the clock in the room to answer these calls. We had literally thousands of telephone calls, and every single lead was documented on paper. It became part of the official police file.
We had to get a name. We had to get some information to tie it in. And the eureka moment came the first time we went public. Within the first hour of releasing these composites, we had a call that came in. It was item number 5, our 5th lead, that named Tyria and Aileen.
Eileen Warnos and Tyria Moore were partners known to be in the Daytona Beach area. Detectives soon realised Warnos used multiple aliases, including the name Lee.
The names of Tyria Moore and Lee Warnos. That was just one of the leads in the pile of leads that we had. But when you go back, and hindsight being 2020, we got her name right out of the block.
Now we're on the right track. And in very short sequence, we had 3 other leads come in that also named the same girls. So now we knew there was something to that.
The red light goes off. When you have that many leads with the same names, we focused on that. And now we can start doing background checks on the names. We actually ran a background check on the Lee that we had with some of the aliases, and that's when we had learned that there was actually an outstanding arrest warrant for Lee Warnos for a crime that had occurred years prior. So now we actually had a photograph to go with one of the names.
It showed us that they had ties to the locations that we were looking at. For example, one of the leads said that the girls had lived in Homosassa Springs, which is over on the west coast of Florida. But it indicated that they had left there, gone inland, which would have been Marion County, and then to the east coast, which was Daytona Beach. Things were starting to build now almost immediately. And it was just a matter of getting through all these leads that we're receiving, investigating them, coming up with enough information to say, this is it, and then finding the girls.
The investigation began to focus in Volusia County of Florida.
We reviewed the leads and determined that the most likely location to find her would be Daytona Beach. So a number of the undercover officers from all over the state went over to Daytona Beach in an attempt to locate her.
I gave him the name of Mike Joyner. He was unbelievably an instrumental part of this case.
They called me in to a meeting and said that they had found out that she was staying in Daytona or close to Daytona, and wanted me to go over there and see if I could find her in some of those biker bars over there.
We knew that they liked hanging out at the bars. So we figured that would be our best bet, was trying to find that type of location that they would hang out at and start looking there. And quite frankly, I think we got a little bit lucky.
The first time I saw her, it was in Port Orange. She was shooting pool. She had a bad scar on her forehead. And I had seen a picture of her. They had showed me. And she was very easy to tell it was her. Just got to know her from then on. They had given me some, money, and I started buying her beer and playing pool and buying cigarettes, and just kind of hung together. But I knew I had her, and I knew I wasn't going to let it out of my sight.
We had hoped to be able to find Aileen and Tyria out in Daytona. We didn't expect to find her this quickly, though.
The last resort, that's where she said she wanted to go. I said, so that's where I want to go. So that's where we went. So we were shooting pool at the last resort, and she just went off, and I was bent down to make a shot, and she just hit me across the back with a pool stick. The woman had no sympathy for nobody. I looked up at her and said, why did you do that? And she said, honey, I don't know. It come over me. I have no reason, no explanation. And I said, let's try not to let that happen again. As we were in the bar, we were dancing, and I had plenty of money, And that's what she was interested in. She wanted to know if I wanted to go out one night and party and bring all my money. And I told her, I said, yeah, I'd love to go out, but I said, you stink. You ain't had a bath. And I don't know when, and I said, I stink. And I said, I ain't doing that. I'll go get a motel room and we'll clean up, but I ain't going out with no stinking ass woman. As an undercover officer, you never lose control. If you lose control, you've lost the situation. Did I get worried about it? No, she wasn't gonna kill me in the bar. I knew that I was not going off with her. I just went and got another beer and said, let's, just whenever you get ready, I'm ready to go, let's go. Because I knew I'd already told them over the body wire that I wasn't going any further with this because I'm not gonna be the next victim. At that point, I went and got a motel room and come back. And when we walked out to my truck to go to the motel, is when they arrested us, because I figured at that point, when she told me, let's go party and bring all my money, I was probably gonna be her next victim.
Eileen Warnos was arrested on January the 9th, 1991.
It was a relief. I think that's the best way to describe it.
I'm a Christian. I believe in the Lord Jesus Christ with all my heart. And I do believe that the Lord give every human a talent. And my talent was to do undercover work.
If she hadn't been caught, she would have kept killing. In fact, in her own words, when she wrote a letter to the court, that's what she said. She said she seriously hates human life and would kill again.
The next day, investigators tracked down Tyria Moore 900 miles away in Scranton, Pennsylvania.
There was no evidence that Tyria Moore was involved when these murders occurred. We can't deny that she knew about the murders because we learned from interviews from Tyria that she was told by Lee Warnos herself that she had killed these men.
When Aileen had met Tyria, Aileen thought, this is my soulmate. This is the person I want to spend the rest of my life with, and I will do anything for this girl.
A plan was hatched to try and turn Tyria against Warnos.
She was very much in love with Tyree. That's all she talked about was her. And I knew that if you could get her to feeling sympathy for Tyree, you could get more from her. When we got Eileen and put her in jail, we come up with a plan to, let's get Eileen and Tyree on the phone and talk. And I told Tyree I would sit there and write notes to her because I had been with Eileen and I kind of knew her mindset.
When Aileen was arrested, she was brought over to the Volusia County Jail. A decision was made to bring Tyria Moore back down and to use her as a witness. She was set up in a motel room. We had a recorded line in there, and she got a letter to Aileen that in essence said, hey Lee, the police are asking questions. I'm afraid of what's going on. I'm afraid I'm gonna get in trouble. Can you call me? Here's the number I'm at.
So I sat there and wrote notes, and Tyree talked to Eileen on the phone. And then the next day is when she finally said, I won't let you take any of the blame for it because you and I both know you had nothing to do with it. And she said, I'm ready to talk to an investigator and confess.
So Lee called her from the jail, and we tape recorded, I think, 13 different phone calls between the girls.
Lee, they're coming after me. I know they are. What? I'm not going to let you go to jail or anything. If I have to confess, I will. Okay. Yes. Why the hell did you do this? Why did you do this? Listen, Ty. Wait. I'll probably never be able to see you. Yes. I love you. If I have to confess everything just to keep you from getting in trouble, I will. Okay. Don't worry, okay? Okay. I love you. No. Don't do it now. Get it over with. Right this very moment? Yeah, let's get it over with. All right.
Aileen kept reassuring Tyria, if I have to confess, I will. She wanted her to know she was there for her, she was going to protect her. When they brought her in initially, they contacted a public defender to represent her before the questioning. And the public defender advised her not to talk to the police. And she said, I have to protect Tyria. And she came in and confessed.
Well, I came here to confess to her. I wanted to be straight up with one thing right there and now. Sure. The reason I'm confessing is there's not another girl. There is no other girl.
Okay, so then what you're telling us is you're voluntarily coming forward to talk to us now.
Yeah, to let you know that I'm the one that did the killing.
I can't get any better when you catch her and they confess and it's over with and it's done.
On January the 16th, 1991, Warnos fully confessed to all 7 murders.
Most of the times I was drunk as hell, and I was a professional hooker. And these guys would take my so when they started to get drunk with me, I just opened up and fired my own. I was trying to make my money and go.
Now, Aileen played the victim. In fact, her initial confession, she was the victim for all of these. They were attacking her, she was protecting herself, so she lashed out and killed them. But that's not what the evidence proved.
They were bad, because they were going to hurt me. This person was either going to physically beat me up, rape me, or kill me. I don't know which one. And I just turned around and did my fair play before I would get hurt.
It's a confirmation of what happened. She killed these men, but she was in fear of her life. But you know what? At least it's a start. We were able to recover the gun. We were able to recover some of the items that had been stolen based on her statement. And we were able to find where she hid her souvenirs. And what had happened was she carried this little briefcase with her. And she was very protective of it. We went ahead and got a search warrant. We opened up the briefcase and we found a roll of paper towels, a bottle of Windex, and a receipt for one of those mini storage sheds that you can rent. And when we went in there was property from 6 of the 7 victims. The one that we didn't find anything from was the first one, Richard Mallory.
Investigators had to figure out why Richard Mallory's murder didn't seem to fit the same pattern as the others.
There's been multiple accounts as to what really happened in that case. And some of those accounts have come from Lee Warnos herself.
While Aileen was a predator later on, when she started killing some more, with Richard Mallory it was a little different. He was heading to Daytona. She was hitchhiking to Daytona. He picked her up hitchhiking. They were drinking. They were hanging out, as it were. And one thing led to another, some type of violent encounter where she ended up killing him. So that was a really different set of circumstances than we saw with the other men. She shot him 4 times with a 9-shot revolver. She took a couple of pieces of property that belonged to him, a camera and a radar detector, and she pawned them. She made some money off of the deal. And what happened after that, and this is typical of our serial killers, is that she went into hibernation. So there's usually what they call a brief cooling off period. And this absolutely applied here. It was about 6 months before she killed again. And a large part of it was due to her paranoia and her fear of getting caught and not knowing, what law enforcement involvement was. And when she came back from that brief cooling off period, now she was the predator, she was the killer, she was the serial killer.
What we have learned from the confession of Lee Warnos, that she would be hitchhiking.
She would pick up men as they stopped to help her, and then she would take them somewhere and kill them and take their money or take whatever value they had.
And with each victim, the rage increased a little bit more. David Spears was shot 6 times. The victim after that, Charles Carskadden, was shot 9 times. She actually emptied the gun out at him. You try and look at what a motive would be. You try and find out what it could be. And there were a lot of interviews done with her, not just police interviews, but the psychological interviews. And because she kept going back and forth on why she did what she did, it's really not clear Again, there's two sides of the story there. And in one side, she's the cold-blooded killer. She had said, I robbed them and I killed them so they couldn't identify me. And then there's the other side of her that says, I was the victim and I was only defending myself.
During their time with Eileen Wuornos, investigators discovered more about her life.
While we can't blame these killings on her childhood, she grew up in an environment that no child should have to. She never knew her father. He was a convicted criminal that was in prison. Her mother didn't want her. Her mother abandoned her when she was 5 months old. So she was raised by her grandparents, but they didn't want her. They didn't feel they should be responsible for her. So she was treated very harshly.
She was surviving, and she was a survivalist, and she knew how to wake up each day. She took care of herself. When she was very young, before she got to her teen years, she was known as a cigarette bandit. And the reason being was that she would trade sexual favors for packs of cigarettes.
Her grandfather had a home-built sauna in his house. And if he wanted to punish her for doing something he didn't like, he'd lock her in the sauna and crank up the heat and just let her stay in there. So by about the age of 11 or 12, she's out on her own. And she's now starting to get more involved in drinking and in sex. And she never had a family to support her. It just wasn't there. In her mind, she thinks everybody's leaving me. My mother left me and my grandparents, they didn't want me. Her grandfather committed suicide the same year that her brother died. She liked her brother, but what happened with him is that he died of throat cancer at the age of 20. So that one bond that she might have had went away at a pretty early age as well.
There are allegations that she was sexually abused as a young child. When she was very young, she did become pregnant. She gave birth, and before she left the hospital, that baby was removed from her, and the baby was given up to adoption.
Detectives discovered that Wuornos' first victim, Richard Mallory, had a criminal record that may have been the catalyst for her crimes.
Now, there was some information that Richard Mallory had been involved in a sexual assault at some point years ago up in Maryland. And there are those that believe that they may have come into play, and it's entirely possible. Again, there's a lot of speculation. It could be that she hated her grandfather and she wanted to lash out and maybe kill him over and over. Or maybe she was killing Richard Mallory over and over when she lined up these other victims. But it's this aspect of her life where she thinks, nobody wants me, they're all doing this because they don't want me. And that was ultimately what led to her confessing, was because when she found Tyria Moore and she developed a relationship with her, she wanted to keep that relationship going. And she said, I would do anything for this girl. The only case Aileen went to trial on was the death of Richard Mallory in Volusia County. She never thought Tyria would turn against her. She never thought Tyria would testify against her. And that was absolutely devastating. When Aileen went to court and Tyria testified, she was absolutely devastated. She stood trial, she testified, she got convicted and sentenced to death. Now, one of the odd twists of this whole thing, after being sentenced for Richard Mallory's death, she elected to plead guilty for 5 other counts of first-degree murder, and she accepted the death penalty without going to trial, which is a very unusual thing to happen. But that was why we only had one trial. She really just wanted to get it over with. She didn't want to go to trial again. She didn't want to sit in that courtroom. She didn't want to face Tyria.
Eileen Wuornos was given a total of 6 death sentences. She wasn't charged with anything in connection to Peter Sims. His body has never been found.
While Aileen was in prison, we took her out on 3 different occasions. So she was taken out of prison and driven to different locations where she thought she might have dumped his body. And all 3 of those trips resulted in no results. Her last interview, the night before she was executed, she started out talking all happy and joyful, and then it was like somebody flipped a switch on her. She just started going nuts. So there's a lot of emotion there. And I don't think she knows how to control it. Either way, good or bad. So it's either the extreme on one end or the extreme on the other.
Eileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection on October the 9th, 2002. She was 46 years old.
There was no sympathy, she was just a ruthless, mean bitch that killed us still.
She shot them multiple times. She left these victims basically in the middle of nowhere. And to do that to another human being, there's zero compassion.
She has no sense of right or wrong. She goes by her own standards. So if she takes a life, to her, it's just another day.
Well, she was evil. She was pure evil.
When they found the body, it looked like it was only dead a week, 2 weeks maybe. He was frozen in a freezer for 2 years.
Richard Kuklinski, otherwise known as the Iceman, a contract killer and mob associate who confessed to killing more than 100 people across 30 years. In December 1986, Kuklinski was finally brought down by an incredible undercover sting operation.
He was huge. He was about 6'4", about close to 300 pounds. Big man. Scary looking guy.
Hi, I'm Nick from True Crime Uncut. Welcome to Questions With. This week we're with New Jersey Task Force lead detective Paul Smith and ATF undercover Special Agent Dominick Prolifone to discuss how they infiltrated and captured career criminal Richard Kuklinski. When did you first become aware of Kuklinski?
In 1985, I was drafted from the Essex County Prosecutor's Office to become a member of the New Jersey Organized Crime Racketeering Task Force to focus on the mob issue that was prevalent here in New Jersey and the New York metropolitan area. And during those cases, this individual's name came up, Richard Kuklinski. And it just seemed that wherever this guy Kuklinski went, people were turning up dead. So we decided to figure out a way to try to put together an investigative plan to find him and arrest him.
I was the undercover special agent for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms that the state and the Attorney General's office asked me if I can do the undercover and infiltrate and meet Richard Kuklinski, hopefully to solve 5 murders. Gary Smith, Daniel Depper, George Malaban, Louis Masgate, and Paul Hoffman.
The individuals were somehow connected to Richard Kuklinski. Some worked with him. They were involved in stolen car rings, pornography, that sort of stuff.
Anything Kuklinski said, they had to do. There was no getting around it, and he ran his crew with us, stern fist, made no bones about it. Because if you didn't listen, you'd die also.
And then there were some other individuals that were businessmen, and we called them the businessmen murders.
They had information where Richard Kuklinski met with an individual that disappeared, but they had no proof.
They were connected to him, sometimes just by a name, Big Richie, or a phone number. And that would be it. On 2 of the murders, 2 of the victims that were found, there was a pink hue on their body. And there's only 2 things that would cause that. And one is carbon monoxide and the other is cyanide poisoning. So we had close relationship with the medical examiner's office at the time. And the medical examiner had performed the autopsies on both of those victims. And so we knew that cyanide potentially was involved in that, at least 1 or 2 of those murders.
What did you know about Kuklinski's background?
I heard about his early life that it was very difficult for him. He was brought up, I believe, in Jersey City. He had an abusive father and mother, and Kuklinski was abused. The kids around the block would take advantage of him. Until one day, he also wound up beating up people and showed that, he's the man and you don't screw around or payback's a bitch.
He was in the pornography business, and I also had detectives that I work with in New York City and Manhattan, and they had identified him as being at locations in New York City that were frequented by mob individuals.
He had no legitimate business. To him, the legitimate business was him murdering people, and he got off on that.
How did you plan to infiltrate Kuklinski's criminal enterprises?
Dominick, in my opinion, was probably the best undercover in the country. He just fit the profile. He talked the talk. He walked the walk. And he was able to make people feel comfortable in that world, that he was part of that world.
They give me the reports. I go back and I'm looking at the reports and I send them into headquarters and they call me up. He says, "You're kidding me, right?" I said, "What?" He goes, "This guy uses pure cyanide to kill people and other drugs to murder people?" I said, "Yeah." "Are you sure you want to do this?" I said, "Yeah, I'm sure." They needed direct evidence. And that's was my mission, to meet with him, to find out how he murdered these people and get that direct evidence. If you think about it and say, "Listen, I want you to go into a place and hang out, and then I want you to find out how these people murdered someone." Somebody asked me how I murdered somebody, I turn around and say, "What are you, freaking cop? It's none of your goddamn business what I do." Turn you right off. So you had to be careful how to manipulate and do that. And I was pretty good at doing that. I was careful, cautious, and I had a lot of experience. I had 15 years. I wasn't a neophyte. If I was a young guy at that time, I don't think they would have pulled it off. I really don't. It took a long time. It took over a year and a half to meet with him.
Our aim with Dominick was to get him into an area where Kuklinski was hanging out and doing his business. There was a location on McBride Avenue they called the Store, where a lot of individuals would go in and they would purchase swag, just stolen property. And there was also gambling and a bunch of other illegal activities going on in there.
I'm going to hang out at the Store where all the wise guys hang out. And hopefully Kuklinski will hang out there again. He was cautious for a while because he knew it was a hot item where cops were watching it. And he was staying away for a while. So I started hanging out at the Store on McBride Avenue. And in the beginning, they were looking at me, but a couple of guys were looking at me and knew I was from New York. I pulled up and I had a Mark IV Lincoln, beautiful car, I had monies, and I was using the name of Dominick Michael Provenzano. And Provenzano was head of the unions, big time mobster here in New Jersey, ran all the unions. And I used that name. And I also had a rap sheet that they had. If they wanted to check on me, they'll see that I was involved with different crimes.
Dominick played the role of an individual that was hooked up in the city, and he was going in and out, doing business.
And it took time. They had, next to the Store was a little old-fashioned luncheonette. Upstairs, they had a couple of apartments, and there were 2 prostitutes that were upstairs and did their business there. And guys would be hanging out, just like Goodfellas. I don't know if you saw the movie. Just like that. Guys hanging out outside, all doing business. They had everything you can think of. It was like, you didn't have to go anywhere and do your business. And was hanging out, and people were getting to know me and asking me, for a lot of things that if I was interested in. And eventually, guys were offering me counterfeit currency. And I said, I'm not really into that. How about some drugs? We talked about narcotics and everything. I said, I got some good people in New York that would be interested. And I said, I'm also interested in steel. So what do you mean steel? I said, bang, bang. It's okay. After a while, I'm meeting at the Store. And people, they're really feeling comfortable with me. And I'm buying them coffee and, playing some numbers with them and everything. And I came up with an idea, and I said, I told my headquarters, ATF, and the task force, said, listen, I'm going to come in there and I'm going to get permission to bring in, with an attaché case, I want to bring in silencers and plastic explosives stolen from the military as an eye-opener. Because Kuklinski was staying away, but they knew in that area that I can hook up and I can get a lot of different things through my connections in New York. So one day I pull up in my Lincoln and I have the black attaché case. I walk across the street and I knew it right away. What do you got in there, Dom? I said, no, it's people in New York. I said, come on, let's go get a coffee. No, hold on. See, inside the store when you walk in, there's little gadgets here and there, and then there's a little back room. So I said, no, it's for people in New York, They're really harping on it and saying, Dom, come on. I said, all right, come on in the back. I open up the attaché, and inside is 10 high-standard .22 caliber silencers, no manufacturer serial number where it can come back to you. In addition to that, stolen military plastic explosives with the lot and block numbers still on them. When they saw that, they went berserk. They said, holy Christ. I said, listen, I can use that. I said, you ever use this stuff? Well, the silencers, yeah. He says, I'd like a couple. What about a couple of blocks of plastic? I said, if you don't know how to use this plastic explosives, I said, and you ignite this stuff, you got to use a blasting cap on this to ignite it. I said, it'll wind up across the George Washington Bridge. I said, you can't be playing with this stuff. We're really interested. I said, next time I come around, I said, you tell me we can talk. We'll do business, but this is for people in New York. I went outside, had some coffee, told them I'll talk to them.
They became very interested at that point in time with Dominick. And that word got back to Kuklinski. Richard Kuklinski was an evil, very capable murderer. And letting Dominick go in and talk to him potentially was very dangerous on his part, for sure. We did our best to back him up, and we were there for him, as he knew. But when it comes down to it, it's one-on-one.
What happened when you first met Richard Kuklinski?
Now, word is out at the store that Dominick Michael Provenzano can wind up getting everything. And he reaches out, and phone rings, and said, it's the big guy wants to know if he can meet with you at the donut shop, which is around the block. I said, when? He says, in about a half hour. I said, tell him, yeah. It's okay. Tell Kuklinski I'll meet him at this donut shop in a half hour. I always had my leather jacket, and I always had a .380 pistol in my pocket, always pointed at him. I also had a recording device on. And the homicide squad at the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office, I told them, I said, he loved to use a nasal spray that he said he used to put in cyanide, pure cyanide, and squeeze it and then watch you die. I said, if he pulls out something like that, I'm going to kill him. And they said, don't worry about it. We cover this area. We got it down. And it was agreed upon that if he pulled that out, all bets are off. Half hour later, I go there. I pull up in my Lincoln. He pulls up in his Camaro. And here comes the Jolly Green Giant, man. Big, big dude. And sure enough, he's got those orange-tinged glasses. He gets out of the car. I get out of the car, and I'm looking at him grow. Man, he's just growing. He's got this half-bared mutt chops and tinted glasses, and he's looking, and he says, how you doing? We shake hands. I said, good. He says, let's go get some coffee. We sat around the corner at the counter, And we ordered a coffee, and then he says, can you do coke? I said, I don't do coke. He said, no, what do you get a kilo for? I said, at the time, it was about $30,000, I said, for a key. He said, well, I can get it for 28. I said, well, I'd go with your guy. He said, yeah, but he says, the only thing is I don't know if I can trust him. And there's a pause there, and I said, you must be a fucking idiot if you can't trust him. Well, let me tell you something. He turned and he looked at me with these orange-tinged glasses. I tell you, he was taking my soul out, but I didn't budge. He looked, and it was the longest, 5 seconds you can think of, because he was just dead staring at me. And he goes, you're right. I said, you're damn right I'm right. I said, you don't deal with people you don't trust. Then he says, I could have fell off the chair. He goes, can you get pure cyanide? This is pure cyanide. You got to have chemists. You got to have people who know how to do this. I said, yeah, I can get it. I said, but one hand washes the other. He says, what do you mean? I said, I'm into the bang business. I said, you show good faith to me, and then I'll come across with the pure cyanide for you. He says, you're on. I said, okay. We go outside. He gives me a telephone number. That number he gave to all the people that disappeared from him. That was the number he used. And I looked at it and I said, I'm just saying to myself, I said, this is how I felt comfortable. I said, I got this son of a gun. That's how comfortable I feel. So I gave him my pager number. We had pagers at the time. And they were still using the phone booths, So he goes his way. We'll be in touch. I go my way.
That was the make or break meeting between Dominick and Kuklinski. Because of my relationship with Dominick that went back so far, I was the one that would meet with him afterwards to brief him. And then we'd go back to the office and go over whatever occurred.
Well, let me tell you something. It was 11, 12 o'clock. 3 o'clock, it was an emergency meeting. I call them all the suits, all come in, all the big bosses and everything at 3 o'clock. And let me tell you something, they were all there. And they asked me to tell what happened. As I do, my pager goes off. This captain says, what is that? And I look, it's Kuklinski, he's paging me. I said, it's Kuklinski. Get him a tape, put it on the phone, let's do this. I said, no, I'm not doing that. I said, listen, he says, everybody, that tried to get into Kuklinski, when he said jump, you jumped. I'm not jumping. He's going to show good faith to me. He's going to produce something for me. I said, and then I'll get the pure cyanide for him. I said, this is what I want to do. I'll call him when I'm ready. I'll call him in a day or two. I just met him. I'm not going to call him. He pays me a good sign, but I'm not going to call him. We're going to go with Dom's way right now, which we did.
Kuklinski tested him, and Dominick tested him right back. And it turned out that he wanted to do business with him.
What happened when you next spoke to Kuklinski?
I said, I'll give him a call. I said, I'll record it and everything. 2 days later, I wait. I go to a payphone, and I call him. He picks up that number that he gave me, and he goes, Jesus Christ. He goes, I've been calling you. I said, Rich, I've been busy. I said, I have a lady friend I see. I said, so I'm sorry. I said, but I've been busy. All right. He says, listen, how's your end? I swear to God, I got this recorded. He says, how's your end? I said, my end's fine. I said, how's your end? He goes, good. He says, you can get the pure cyanide. I could have fell over. This is how we're talking. Not codes or anything. I said, yeah, I can get the pure cyanide, but you're going to show good faith to me, Rich. He says, guaranteed. You'll get the hit kit. You'll get a call from me. He says, and we'll discuss business. I said, okay. He says, we'll be in touch. Hung up. I gave the tape to Paul Smith, who also then brought it to Bobby Carroll, the head prosecutor. They would view it, listen to it, and then ask me questions that I need to ask Richie regarding certain cases, which we were doing. And Richie suggested, which I had no problem with, was meeting at the Vince Lombardi service station. I thought that was a great idea. It's transient people you can fit in, you can fit male, female personnel in there, because it's great. It's a great opportunity. Now, if he would have said, listen, come to my house, let's go to this apartment. So no. You always want to meet where you feel comfortable. Not someplace where they have control over you, where you feel comfortable. Vince Lombardi was great. I didn't hesitate at all. And we had great surveillance teams there. And that's where he sold me then the first hit kit. Now, this sets the investigation forward. He showed good faith in me. During that conversation, it was real quick. Paid him the $1,100. Bought the assassination kit. It was a high standard .22 caliber silencer affixed to a .22 caliber weapon. So if I shot you there, it wouldn't sound like a firearm. And we said, we'll meet again and discuss business. And we met several more times at the Vince Lombardi service station.
By the time Dominick and Kuklinski were talking back and forth, the information was coming in about Kuklinski. He was in Switzerland. He was going down to South Jersey, doing deals with different stolen weapons, and he was into a lot of different things. And so we were able to incorporate some of that information into his discussions, all the while focusing on having him talk about the murders, all the while knowing that these people he killed with cyanide. And we had to come up with a plan to try to figure out how to get him to talk about how he killed people with cyanide.
Why did you come up with a plan to carry out a fake hit alongside Kuklinski?
After Dominick had gained Kuklinski's confidence, we had some meetings, and at one of those meetings, Bobby Carroll came up with an idea about having someone set up to be killed, and maybe we can get Kuklinski to go in on the hit with Dominick. And that was the basic sketch plan. At the time, I didn't realize that I was going to be that person, but it turned out that's what it was. And so that's what we did. Dominick talked to Kuklinski. By that time, Kuklinski had already talked to Dominick about, can you get cyanide? And Dominick said, yes, I can get it. And cyanide's not easy to get. If you're in the jewelry business and some businesses, they use it. But it's not easily, you can't buy it in the drugstore. Dominick used the lure of obtaining cyanide for Kuklinski. And during that time, he was also talking to him and trying to get him to talk about how he would kill somebody. And that's when he came up with this idea about killing this rich kid that always had $200,000 on him. He's a fast mover. He's in and out of New Jersey into New York. I can bring him somewhere and we can kill him.
And then he'd get rid of the rich kid, put him in the barrel and dump the body, and we'd split $80,000. We'd make a quick profit.
And Kuklinski said, sure, absolutely. And at the time, we were meeting at the Lombardi service station. And Dominick said, all right, I can bring him to the car and we'll just shoot him. And that's when Kuklinski said, why be loud? Why be messy? We'll just do it my way. And he said, what are you talking about? He said, we'll put some cyanide on a hamburger. Does he like hamburgers? We'll put it in the ketchup and we'll mix it up. And that's when Dominick said, what are you, James Bond? What are you talking about? And that's when Kuklinski started to talk and explain in great detail how you can kill somebody with cyanide. But then he also went further and said how he did kill people with cyanide.
How did you get the recorded confession?
I had several conversations with Kuklinski at the Vince Lombardi service station. He would tell me things where I said, Rich, I murder people with guns. I said, you know, when I do a hit or a job, I said, what is this with the pure cyanide? He goes, listen, my friend, it's nice and easy, it's simple. I used to say, a little boost, a little squirt. That boost, you watch them keel over. Looks like they died of a heart attack. However, he says, now, if your client said you want to make a statement, he says, hey, you cut their tongue out, you stick it up their rectum, or you put a bird in their mouth. He says, there's things to do to make it, hey, they're making a statement. If they want it nice and clean, he says, I use the boost. He says, it's very simple. And, you know, we went on and on about how he murdered people and how he put cyanide at, with his crew. He wanted to get rid of an individual. They meet at the York Motel because Richie wants to murder Gary Smith.
He said, I kept him in a hotel room. I made sure he was really hungry. And I brought him a nice hamburger. And I smeared the cyanide, put it in the ketchup, put the pickles on it. And the guy was really hungry.
And they were all eating the hamburgers. And Gary Smith is eating the hamburger, and Richie says, and I'm looking, and they're talking, and he keeps eating.
I had one guy I was watching, I couldn't believe it. He almost consumed the whole fucking thing before it hit him. He must have had a constitution of a fucking bull. Well, I ate the whole fucking burger. Oh, I must have been hungry.
Then finally, he says his eyes rolled back. He fell back. He says, we're all laughing. He says, and he's in convulsions and he's just shaking. He says, then they grabbed a lamp cord and put it around his neck, make sure he was dead, and we put him under the bed.
We were extremely happy that Dominick was able to get Kuklinski to talk about how to kill with cyanide and that he did kill with cyanide. And the specifics of how he did it matched the evidence that we had. And that's the important part. You know, it's one thing to believe somebody committed a crime and have evidence that he committed a crime. It's another thing to indict somebody and prosecute somebody and get a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's what we had to do.
Over 4 months, Undercover Agent Dominick Prolifone gathered all the information the task force needed to prove Richard Kuklinski was using cyanide to murder people. Not only that, he described the murders of not just Gary Smith, but also George Maliband, Louis Masgay, Paul Hoffman and Daniel Deppner. The recordings also revealed the great lengths Kuklinski went to confuse the police in regards to both how and when his victims had been killed. Before we continue, please do like, hype and subscribe. It really helps the channel. But now, back to Paul and Dom. How did Kuklinski become known as the Iceman?
Louis Masgay, I believe, he disappeared. And what he did with Masgay, he told me that he didn't trust him anymore, so he froze the body. He left him in a freezer for 2 years. He says, I made the cops look like jerks. I said, what do you mean?
The coroner said he was dead 2 weeks. In actuality, he was dead 2.5 years. The freezer maintains everything. You mean to tell me this guy was dead for 2 years and his features and everything was the same? Yeah, believe me, I saw it. He had the same pair of pants on, same shoes, same shirt, same sweater. Everything was the same.
He says, I made him look stupid. So we're laughing, you know. However, when they started doing the autopsy and they find crystals in the body, and they said, something's wrong. And they put 2 and 2 together, and they find out that this person was missing 2 years ago, allegedly was meeting with Kuklinski, never found again until recently, and he wasn't dead for a week or two. He was frozen in a freezer for 2 years.
What happened when the time to carry out the fake hit finally arrived?
Kuklinski's plan was, and he told Dominick, to bring the rich kid to Lombardi service station and he was going to go and get some egg sandwiches and come back. And then we were all going to meet and sit and talk. And in the meantime, while Richie was gone, he was going to put the cyanide on the sandwiches.
I had simulated cyanide that the lab made up, that we were making Richie, and we were going to kill this rich kid.
Kuklinski said, I want to see what this kid looks like. I don't make mistakes. So at the time, I was working undercover on another case, and I was driving a red Porsche. And we set up a time and date that Dominick and I were supposed to meet, and Kuklinski was supposed to be in the parking lot. And so I drove in, I met with Dominick, we did a fake deal, and Dominick said to me, how's it feel to know that there's somebody in the parking lot that's going to kill you? And I said, well, how does it feel to know that after he kills me, he's going to kill you? So we laughed about it, you know, but it was also serious business.
Kuklinski meets that morning. I give him the cyanide and the 3 egg sandwiches that he's supposed to lace with the pure cyanide. He says, my wife has something, I got to get back home, I'll be back.
At the time that we were at Lombardi service station waiting for Kuklinski to come back, a state trooper surveillance trooper called in and said that he observed Kuklinski in the trunk of his car doing something bent over. And that was where he put the sandwiches in. So at that point in time, we said, enough's enough, we have to arrest him. So we went to Dumont, New Jersey.
They see him leaving now with his wife in the car. He pulls out, they give the signal to take him down. All hell is breaking loose on the streets.
He was pulling out of the driveway, he just happened to be pulling out. And the van went to cut him off, and he just drove up over a lawn and just came right at me. And I just happened to be right in the front. And all of a sudden, the car went from speeding full blast to just start to slow down. And I ran over to the side, the door was open, and it turned out there was a woman in the car. And I opened the door, and he was leaning over, and it turned out there was a 9mm under his seat. So I opened the door, and I tried to get him out, but he was huge. So I just got him sideways. And then everybody else came and placed him under arrest.
They couldn't even get the cuffs on him. That's how big of a massive man he was. And they transport him to the Bergen County Sheriff's Office. And they have the biggest troopers you can believe to grab him. And they were small compared to Kuklinski. He was a big guy.
He was about 6'4", about close to 300 pounds.
And that's when he goes before the judge, and he goes before Judge Kuklinski.
Dominick Prolifone was in the courtroom. And, Richard Kuklinski looked around to see who was there, and he saw Dominick. And then he knew that everything was up. The jig was up.
He had no idea. You'd think he's going to tell me all this stuff and then deal with me in illegal weapons, and just doesn't happen like that, you know.
What are your final thoughts on Richard Kuklinski?
I think he enjoyed killing somebody, but he also wanted an economic benefit out of it. He wouldn't think twice about killing somebody.
He claims he killed over 100, maybe 200. I don't believe that. I know 5 for a fact. I'd even go maybe 8 or 10.
I've seen a lot of people, a lot of murderers, a lot of sick people, and he's up there on the top of the list. The dichotomy with him, though, was interesting because he had a family. He had children, and yet he was able to go out and kill somebody and then come home and wrap Christmas presents. It's just doesn't make sense. Flies in the face of our normal human reality.
He figured he'd never get caught. He was proud, he controlled everything, and he controlled you if he could. But one thing he didn't do, he didn't control me. Kuklinski loved killing. When he used to tell me about it, it was like him reading a little book and explaining it, how joyful it is, and watch them squander and shake. He says, "'Cause I own them." He was absolutely sadist, brutal son of a gun. And that's putting it politely. I call him the devil himself. That was actually the devil walking on earth.
On March 16, 1988, Richard Kuklinski was convicted of the murders of Gary Smith and Daniel Deppner. He was given 2 life sentences with a minimum term of 30 years. He later pled guilty to killing George Malaband and Louis Masgay and was given an additional 2 life sentences. Though Kuklinski confessed to murdering Paul Hoffman, this charge was eventually dropped in exchange for pleading guilty to the murders of George and Louis. Richard Kuklinski died on March 5, 2006 in a prison hospital wing at St. Francis Medical Center in Trenton, New Jersey. He was 70 years old.
He was letting us know that you don't have the killer. I'm still here.
Bill Suff, otherwise known as the Riverside Prostitute Killer.
There's somebody out there that feel that these women are nothing more than trash. And so we're gonna treat them like trash. After we kill them, we're gonna dump them in the trash.
Hi, I'm Nick from True Crime Uncut. Welcome to Questions With. This week we're speaking to former senior investigator Bob Creed and former homicide detective Christine Keir Sheffield about how they caught California serial killer Bill Suff.
They don't stop. They don't stop until they're caught or they're dead. Kim Little from Lake Elsinore. She was found laying face down along an embankment adjacent to a dirt road, and she was wearing a man's Western-style shirt, button-up shirt. She had pants on. She had a long blue bath towel that covered her. Now, this was significant to the profiler. He felt that the suspect knew her. There was some kind of relationship. There was a sign or an indication of remorse. He couldn't look at her. He covered her. He left her there. In December of 1989, there was a victim found out in the Quell Valley area, Tina Leal. She was found adjacent to a main road, but she was wearing men's clothing. The suspect had spent some time where he had mutilated her body. During the autopsy, the pathologist discovered that a 95-watt light bulb had been inserted into her vaginal vault. According to the pathologist, he felt that the suspect had to take quite a bit of time with her because the light bulb was intact. It hadn't broken, hadn't shattered. In the case of Darla Ferguson in January of 1990, her body was found in a remote area along a dirt road just outside of Lake Elsinore. Now, the unique thing with Darla Ferguson was that she was nude, she was strangled just like the other victims, but her upper torso was covered in a very large black bag, a trash bag, and it was tied at the waist. And the profiler informed us that he felt the suspect had covered her face because he couldn't look at her. This particular victim was posed. She had been stabbed in the chest. And the person that killed her, it appeared, had stood over her and ate a grapefruit. The body was found in a grapefruit orchard because there was grapefruit peels on and about the body. We got a call from a sheriff's department in Wisconsin, and she said that we have an inmate here that says that he knows something about a murder that took place in Riverside, California. Are you guys interested? The information that he supplied to her and she forwarded to us was confidential information. No one was supposed to know this information. As far as cause of death, the grapefruit peelings, how the body was found, the number of stab wounds, where those stab wounds were on the body. So this information was gold. And we felt we've got this person. There was 14 task force members that responded to Wisconsin. Of course, he was asking what's going on, what is all this about, and we gave him the victim's name. Do you know her? He goes, yes, I know her. She was like my wife. We lived together for years. What do you mean? We were together. Yeah, I know her. And we said, well, do you know how she died? And he knew about the grapefruit peels. He knew how she was stabbed. Well, how do you know all this? Well, because I contacted the coroner's office when I heard that she had died, and they sent me the coroner's report, which was supposed to be sealed and not released to anybody. So what we did is we contacted Steve Sikorsky, and the forensic personnel and the other investigators were at his house. And we said, this is what he's telling us. He's telling us that I believe it was in a drawer in the kitchen area. And why don't you guys take a look real quick and see if it's there? Steve did, and there it was. There was a coroner's report. So we had spent all this time, money, and effort and manpower on basically a wild goose chase. Saturday morning about 4:15, the phone rings in my hotel room. It's Detective Kears. She goes, Bob, guess where I'm at? I said, what do you got? And she goes, we have another victim. Well, there was a newspaper article that day saying that the task force was in Wisconsin. So this was his way of letting us know that, no, you don't, I'm still here.
Cheryl Coker was the first amputation of the breast, and in the dumpster area. And if somebody had not disturbed the weeds, it might have been a long time that we had found her body. But again, in a dumpster area where people put trash, that's where she was found. From where the body was located, there was up an embankment. And when he sliced her breast off, he tossed it like a frisbee that went all the way up the embankment on the top up there. So that was rather unusual, because normally if you're going to have a mutilation, they just do it right there and drop it, and that's it. But to toss it like he did, as we go through the cases, you'll see they did the same thing with Eleanor Casares. Sliced the breast off and tossed it. And so once we identified who she was, then you say, okay, this is a prostitute. It might have been a trick gone bad or something of that nature. So you don't know what happened, if it was a boyfriend. You don't know if it was a John that she was working or what. That was the first one for me. It was not until Susan Sternfield, and her body was definitely posed, again in a dumpster area. So in my mind, I'm thinking that there's somebody out there that feel that these women are nothing more than trash. And so we're going to treat them like trash. After we kill them, we're going to dump them in the trash. When you're starting to find women that are placed in dumpster areas, heads being covered up, certain portions of the bodies being covered up, you start to do a little bit of a tie-in.
We all felt strongly that we had one person that was involved, and we felt that we had a series of murders occurring within our jurisdiction.
University was the hot spot for prostitutes. So I would go out on the street as a prostitute, undercover. So I got the feel of what it was like to walk up and down University Avenue. I had a very good rapport with most of the girls out there. I could be driving down the street, the girls knew who I were. I could pull over and talk to any of them. You become friendly with them. They had no fear. They had no fear of anything. I had business cards made up that didn't look like police business cards. They had little roses and flowers around them with my phone number in the middle. No name, just a phone number. They didn't utilize them. I would tell the girls, it's not safe. There is a serial murder out here. They saw their friends being killed. Acquaintances that they'd known out there, worked with for years. They were seeing them being killed, but they were still doing it. They felt they could handle anybody out there because they were tough.
Then in August of 1991, our fourth victim for that year was found in the city of Corona. The victim fit the profile. She was nude. She was found in a semi-public area in a position that would shock the person that found her. Detective Chris Kears responded to the location, and she recognized the victim, who was later identified as Kelly Hammond.
When I got out there, they had already had a tent set up. They were already working the body. And I knew that Kelly Hammond was a good friend of Kelly Whitecloud's. So I went to University Avenue, and I looked for Kelly Whitecloud. And it took me about 30 minutes, and I found her. I said, get in the car, Kelly. She got in. We chatted. And I asked her, when's the last time you saw Kelly Hammond? She goes, oh, I saw her last night. Why? I go, Kelly was murdered last night. She said, I'll bet it was the guy that she got in with last night. And I said, what are you talking about? She goes, I got in the car with a guy last night, and I told him before I did the trick, I wanted a hot fudge sundae from McDonald's. As they went inside, she told the waiter up at the counter that she wanted her nuts on the bottom and not on the top. Well, Kelly, being a pretty streetwise girl, got her nuts on top and went berserk. And he's trying to pay for this hot fudge sundae and get out of there. Well, when they get outside, he goes, I'm taking that dollar something out of the $10 I'm going to pay you. And she basically told him to screw off and got out of the vehicle. She sees him pull across the street to her friend Kelly, and she yells to her, Kelly, don't get in the vehicle with him. He's a cheap MF. And Kelly Hammond got in the vehicle. So that was a very key piece of evidence that we had. And I think it was only because the rapport I had made with the girls that I got all that information. Once I got her to the police department, I had an artist come in from the university to do a composite drawing. And they were in there for about 2 hours. Kelly told her, she goes, he's a white guy with a chubby face. He's wearing glasses. He had a police-like cap sitting on the centerfold of the van. And she really gave an awesome description. I was ecstatic. I just felt that we were getting closer now. We had something. We could put out that this is what the guy looks like. We could put out that be on the lookout for a gray van. We knew that, at least I knew, that the suspect was reading the newspaper because our chief made a statement, possibly because the press was asking for more information on how the case was going. And he said, well, we do know that he has not killed an African-American woman. And it wasn't 2 weeks later that we had an African-American woman that was murdered.
Our victim was Catherine McDonald. She was our 5th victim for 1991. This one was different. This victim was sexually mutilated. He spent a lot of time with this victim. He did things to her as far as mutilation that he had not done with other victims. But the area where she was found was in a new housing development that had just been graded. So the dirt was soft, and this is where we got our best tire impressions and our best shoe impressions. While we were out there processing the crime scene, we had 2 investigators that were newly assigned to the task force that had driven to the city of Riverside, to the county purchasing department, to obtain desks, file cabinets, chairs that they needed for their task force office. The person that was assisting them was a warehouseman by the name of Bill Suff. While they were there getting their equipment, their pagers went off. They asked Bill Suff if they could use his telephone to call dispatch and see why they were being paged. Of course, Bill Suff said sure, and he stood by while these 2 investigators used his telephone, his desk, to call dispatch to see why they were being paged. Then a few months later, there was another victim found, Delia Zamora. She was found next to a park and ride. Miss Zamora fit the profile of the other victims. However, she was fully clothed, and there was no obvious signs of trauma with her initially. But she, as the others, her cause of death was manual strangulation. But this led us to believe that he must have felt that he was interrupted. It looks like he probably just drove up, dumped the body, and then drove off in a hurry. Our killer was out there killing a person a month. We had a murder in July, in August, September, and then Delia Zamora in October. We know he's going to hit again in November. This guy is he's just out of control. So we're putting all of the resources that we can out on the streets, around the clock. But there's no murder. We have no victim, at least not that we found, for the month of November. Our next victim is on December the 23rd, 1991, and she's in the city of Riverside.
It was 1.5 miles from my home. It was in a heavily shaded orange grove area. I saw it was Eleanor. I was just like, oh my God. You know, we just had this talk. We just had this talk. I told Eleanor Casares, white male, don't get in a gray van. I told her that. She's the only one I told. And I knew she had little children. So, again, you fight back your emotions and say, we got to get this solved.
The one thing all victims had in common, as far as the cause of death, was that they were all strangled. Most of them were manually strangled, some had a ligature, which also gave us additional evidence. Tape lifts and trace evidence from the autopsies around where ligature marks were on the victims indicated that there was a sisal type rope that was used, because the fibers that were left on the victims were consistent with that of a sisal rope, very coarse.
It was the physical evidence, the fibers, the rope, the cat hairs, the blanket hairs, and things that, as you start going down, you're seeing a comparison where you're finding the same fibers of the same types that are matchable, that's all coming from one source.
Most of the victims in this case were left along dirt roads or dirt fields. So because of that, we were able to document these tire impressions and shoe impressions. So we approached the California State Department of Justice Crime Lab in Riverside, Steve Sikorsky. And part of Steve's responsibility was taking this evidence, examining it, identifying it, isolating it, and determining if it's significant to the case or not, as well as looking at tire impressions and shoe impressions. We assigned one of the deputies to assist Steve to try and identify some shoe impressions that were left at several of the scenes. He took a photograph of the shoe impression that was found at the scene, and it was blown up to a 1-to-1 ratio, which means it's the actual size of the impression. He went to a mall in Riverside, and he went to all the different shoe stores, picking up shoes, looking at the bottom, to try and find the same pattern. And after many hours, he found that shoe. The shoe was a Pro Wing. So now we had a shoe identified, and we have a shoe size identified. Most of the scenes made it somewhat easy to get a full length of a tire impression. So what Steve would have to do then is try and identify the make and the model of the tire that left that impression. And we came out with a number of cars that fit that track and wheelbase. So we're starting to get a picture of this person.
We decided to call it Operation Apprehension. I put a picture of the suspect and a description of the glasses, of the police hat that he had on the console, just little tidbits of what they might find inside the vehicle. I said he will be on University Avenue. If you see this individual in these specific areas and he's trying to pick up a prostitute, stop him. I went home that night very excited, thinking, dear Lord, let it happen. Let it happen tonight so we can get this case over with. And believe me, when I got the call at 9 o'clock, I couldn't jump in my clothes fast enough. I was that excited. I believe the phone call came from Lieutenant Asper. He saw the guy make a U-turn. There was a prostitute on the other side of the street. He stopped the vehicle, and I asked Lieutenant Asper to have the officer tell me what the driver's side front tire was. And he looked down and he told me. And I had a chart of exactly what tire was in what position on the vehicle. I then asked him to go to the passenger side rear vehicle and tell me what the tire brand was. When he did that, I said, freeze the scene, I'm en route.
Early in the morning, I got a phone call from my partner, John Davis. It was about 2 in the morning. I knew in his voice something big was going on. He goes, Bob, we got him. I said, what do you have? He goes, we got him. He's in custody. And I couldn't believe it. So John gave me the details, advised that the person's name was Bill Suff, William Suff, white male, 41 years old. He was stopped on a vehicle stop in the city of Riverside after having contact with a prostitute and then driving off. One of the officers, when he looked inside of the vehicle between the driver's side of the van and the console was a knife. Appeared to be like a steak knife, and it had some reddish brown dried residue on it. Bill Suff was hired by the county of Riverside as a warehouseman. While we were out there processing the fifth crime scene, we had two investigators that were being assisted by Bill Suff. These investigators were taking down notes on the very body, on the very person, the victim, that he had killed the day before. While Bill Suff was nearby watching them, you can just imagine the euphoria that he felt, the feeling that he was smarter than us. That here we are using his desk, his phone, writing down information on a murder that he committed, and we had no idea that it was him.
And in looking in that van, the fibers matched, the colors matched, the police hat matched. And he looked like the composite. And he said, you know, why am I being brought in for making an illegal U-turn? I said, oh, okay, well, we'll talk about it when we get downtown. I was told by my sergeant that I would be doing the interview with the detective from the sheriff's department. Here's how I felt. It doesn't make any difference what case we get him on. If we get him on one, we got him on them all because of the physical evidence. So I was really hammering on the Eleanor Casares case, and that's because of the evidence that was there. The tread marks. I mean, I can basically tell you exactly what he did, and I told him. I said, no, Bill, you got out of your passenger side door. He goes, yeah, I went out to pick some oranges. On your way to work? Yeah. And I said, you backed your van in? He goes, yeah, I backed it in there, and so I could have my box back there to put the oranges in. And you walked to the back of your van, and you opened your van up. And you took something out. And as I'm interviewing, he goes, I found a body. He goes, but I didn't pull the knife out of her chest. I had never mentioned any of this. And it's right after that he invokes. He says, I want a lawyer.
And the next step was to obtain a search warrant for Bill Suff's residence in Colton. So at 4 o'clock in the morning, John Davis and myself, we knocked on the door. The wife answered, asked her if she was Cheryl. Yes. Told her we would like to talk to her. As soon as I stepped foot inside of the house, a tan cat ran across the room in front of me from the living room into the kitchen area. I knew we were looking for tan animal hair from some of the trace evidence that had been picked up. As she turns on lights, next to the couch where I was sitting was a pair of Pro Wing shoes. I sat down on the couch and started to explain that we were conducting an investigation. John had gone over to a lamp that was it was like a pole lamp. As he went to turn the light on, he noticed that the light bulb was a 95-watt light bulb. That's significant because with our victim, Miss Leal, she had had the light bulb that was inserted into her vaginal vault. And the unique thing about the light bulb that was found inside of Miss Leal was that it was a 95-watt light bulb, just as this was. Now, you can't buy a 95-watt light bulb in a store. The 95-watt is usually used for commercial use, we found out. So it's all coming together, and we're excited. After we had completed the search warrant of his residence, we went on to interview neighbors. We went to the apartment manager and contacted her. She had a lot of great information for us. Just before Christmas, Bill Suff had gone to her and said, hey, I've got this clothing that doesn't fit my wife any longer. Would you like to have it? So the apartment manager took it with some reluctance, put it on a shelf to be disposed of, but she still had possession of that clothing, thank goodness. That clothing was identified by Eleanor Casares' family. Bill Suff was raised in the Southern California area around Lake Elsinore and Paris. Just before joining the Air Force, he had met a young girl, and at which time they got married.
I had 2 children, moved to Texas when he was in the military, and he was getting out of the military, and she got a job, so he had no job, so he stayed home and watched the children. And I think it was that relationship, that the jealousy and possessiveness that caused him to take it out on the children, because his first child, a daughter, 8 months old, baby, he burnt, he beat, ruptured the spleen, and killed the child.
They ended up arresting both Bill Suff and his wife. Bill Suff tried to blame his wife for creating those injuries on their daughter. Subsequently, they were both convicted, and William Suff was sentenced to 70 years in state prison in Texas.
The interesting part about this is that he was released early from prison and paroled to California because he got his bachelor's degree. He was a shining example of a prisoner.
Suff moved back to California, moved in with his mother.
His demeanor was, I'm just a poor lonely boy, I didn't do any of this, I'm being falsely accused. You would think that the women that he murdered could have beat him up. That's how milquetoasty he was. So he had a good facade going on there about who he really was.
The only time I ever saw any emotion was when the verdict was read. When the jury came back with the guilty verdict, he wept. They found him guilty on 12 of the 13 counts.
To watch the families come out after he was found guilty on all but 1 count. But the families all sigh of relief and happiness and hugging each other when the verdict came back in.
And he was sentenced to death. It's bittersweet. I mean, you're elated that he was caught and he was convicted, but you still have all these victims and their families. They're still without their loved one.
Well, in the state of California, the death penalty, it means you never die until legislation changes. However, you can only die once. That's how I look at it. He's never getting out. Thank God.
These serial killers are able to operate so long is because they blend in with society. Like with Bill Suff, he had a job. He had a family. Nothing stood out about him. He was never on any of our tip lines, and we had many, many people that we were checking out on our tip lines, and his name never once surfaced, and he never came up on the radar.
He was adorned in the community. People at work loved him. He was good to everybody on the outside. He did a rideshare program for the county where he transported women, and he was paid for that for the county. It was kind of like surreal. You know, here's this guy who's murdering these women at nighttime, but in the daytime, he's just the most wonderful person you want to go have a beer with or something. He had this facade going on about him that you could trust him, that he was a kind and giving person. But at the same time, he had that secret devil within him that came out.
Bill Suff is currently on death row at San Quentin Prison in California. In 2024, new DNA evidence led to Suff admitting to the killing of 19-year-old Kathy Small in 1986. Due to his pending death sentence, Suff is not expected to be tried for this murder. We hope you enjoyed this video on the terrifying crimes of Bill Suff. For more content like this on horrific serial killers and intriguing criminal cases, please subscribe and give us a thumbs up down below. Leave a comment if there's a killer you'd like us to cover in the future. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.